excuse me, Mayor Combs? When
Yeah.
when we all reconvene, can you remind us
City Council Member
what
Mueller,
are we doing? And how does lunch fit in? Just for those people who are always thinking about food.
So if we can wait until City Council Member Mueller has joined us so we can officially reconvene the meeting, as we are still live. Thank you. All right. Having all City Council members return to our virtual dais, Mayor Combs, we may reconvene. And City Council Member Wilson, if you could just restate the question so he can respond. Thanks.
It was about lunch. It was just like any sense on what are we doing before lunch versus after lunch, just for the public and everyone participating.
Yeah, so as I see it, and so the plan is still to take lunch at noon. We may go a little over, but to have a 30-minute lunch break at noon. And the lead up to that lunch break, what I want to do is hear from council members, specifically. I hope to frame this portion as what on the list that presented by staff and what of the items presented by the public during public comment is not there. In a very specific, like what project, like, right, do you think should be on the list or should be in consideration for being a priority that is not? And certainly you can share more broadly, hopefully without taking up too much time, about how you got there. But at the end of the day, what I want to do is I want to record, projects, right? And then after that, we'll bring staff into the mix and have a discussion of all that we have heard and see if the extent to which of those things that have been identified by council members and by the public, of which are new, like, is there a consensus to a further consideration of them? And so, and again, of course, throwing in the items that have already been presented by staff in the staff report. And so that's, that's how I see it going. But at this point, I want to hear from you guys, again, specifically within the rubric of is there something here? Is there something that you think should be here, should be a priority, or should be on a work plan that you have not heard or seen? Councilmember Mueller.
So appreciating that we're talking about things that weren't brought up in public comment or that weren't on the list from staff. As I've been, and I want to say all the suggestions in public comment they're all excellent projects. I appreciate Councilmember Willison's comments, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness that staff came up with their recommendations. The one thing that I'm a little concerned about that was not listed, specifically called out in the goals and priorities, and was not talked about today in public comment, is that we're in the middle of a pandemic. And part of that is just COVID-19 response and recovery support, which we all know took a tremendous amount of time last year. During our year, we had more meetings than ever as a council. And a lot of that was related to COVID-19 response and recovery. And I'm, like many, I'm hopeful that there is an end here in sight, but also have to be honest in that with new variants and twists and turns, we can't be 100% certain of that. And so I think as we do this process, it is we obviously care very much about our mission and we care about our goals, but this also is very operational. It's an operational discussion. And COVID-19 response, recovery, and support is very operational, and it's going to eat up capacity. And there is the question, as we look at it from a council perspective, should we be setting aside and delegating operational support for vaccination and testing discussions, especially through an equity lens? Should we be looking at downtown recovery, small business recovery, and coordinating with state and county supportive services on the issues of mental health and childcare? And I understand that within that discussion, we can say, well, there are other lead agencies, but the ability to actually work with those lead agencies and make an impact at a local level in our city is something that I think requires local attention, requires city attention. And even if it's just having capacity to communicate and facilitate the delivery of those services to those who need it in our city. And so as I went through all of this, what really struck me is that how much in the last year our life has changed, how much people are suffering in this, the disparity between those who are suffering and those who are dealing. And how do we as a city set aside the operational capacity and empower our staff to make an impact in all of those areas: vaccination, testing, housing security, business recovery, and then the coordination for all those supportive services. So I just, all of the other areas we've talked about and people have brought up are all very deserving, but I don't want us to lose track of where we actually are in a city and just how much of last year and how much of the year going forward and how much of our residents' thoughts and lives have been affected by this pandemic. So those are my thoughts at the outset of things that I would think we would need to have added to the discussion.
Thank you, Councilmember Mueller. Are there any other, again, items from the dais that were not mentioned and you'd like to bring attention to for us to sort of have include in the larger discussion? Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Combs. And I appreciate the public comment that was shared earlier, and then also the framing from Councilmember Willison, and then also what Councilmember Mueller just shared. And something to follow up on that as far as the COVID response and recovery. The city of Menlo Park has, I believe it is 1,398 COVID cases as of date. Every Friday, the county updates the specific data to city. I have been asking for more granular data, specifically by census tract, because the area that has the highest number of COVID cases, it's usually the numbers are spread out through the city, even though the highest number of cases are in one area. And so I have been unsuccessful at getting that information. The standard is set by the state. I have been pressuring the county to give us that information because for me, it would help. What is not on the list, I believe, needs to be some type of robust education and outreach to all residents in Menlo Park about what's happening today. Another item that is not on the list, just to remind us of our organizational chart, our residents are on the top. We work for our residents. So I would like to prioritize what their needs are. Going back to 4 resolutions that we passed, 2 in 2020 and 2 in 2019. All of these resolutions have words like equity. And so whenever I see that, I think about the action because we haven't taken any action around equity on these. Resolution 6535, which is declaring Menlo Park as climate crisis, supporting the county. Resolution 6563. This is the resolution proclaiming proclaiming Black Lives Matter in the city of Menlo Park. These have specific items. There are 5 items on the list. The next is Resolution 6553, affirming Menlo Park's commitment to values of equity, fairness, and justice in responding to COVID-19. And there is one more, and that is Resolution 6493. This is Menlo Park, a resolution that the city of Menlo Park calls to climate and sustainability action in Menlo Park. The climate action plan is still number 15 on our priority list. I personally did not vote to remove it. There were several comments assuming that it's no longer on our list. In my mind, it is. And if we have to vote it to put it back on there, I'm willing to do that. When it comes to the resolutions, I'm hoping we can create policy that says we have to take action on it. It's not just a piece of paper that we support a county or an initiative with the state. It's something that we're actually planning on doing something with. And then the other is, I see a deficit in diversity when it comes to the city of Menlo Park and our staff. I would like there to be a focus on making sure that we have leadership, not just elected leadership that looks like our community, but hired leadership as well. We need a seat at every table, not just someone creating space for us and telling us when we can be there. And so these are things that I have been struggling with for the past 2 years since I've been in office, because I'm re-explaining the same piece. The experience of not having access and inclusion, someone else has determined your value and they've also determined your options. And that is not inclusion. That's actually exclusion. You're telling people what you're willing to do for them. I believe that we bring everyone to the table to make sure everyone has an opportunity to talk about their experiences. We create space, and we do that with the intention. And because we do not have enough diversity on our leadership team, I find myself having these conversations repeatedly. And I will continue to do that. I just believe that this needs to be a discussion, a policy discussion at the council level. And let's see, I have tons of buckets. I have a list of probably about 20 items that probably overlap with a lot of what other council members are concerned about. I do not want to spend time specifically listing them. One that came up specifically for me yesterday, and also Vice Mayor Nash, and this comes to land use in the city of Menlo Park. I know that there is a problem, discriminatory practices with land use. If you want to design a healthy community, you set the intention with land use and zoning to do that. That hasn't been done in District 1. And so for me, that is still a priority, and anything related to that. I'm also bringing up the fact that we have the lowest number on the healthy index for the city of Menlo Park. We have limited choices to healthy options, whether we want to dine in or buy our own food. We have 0 options when it comes to health resources, whether it is a pharmacy or even a clinic. And so, in thinking about that, and also being surrounded by highways and freeways. So, so for me, those are a few things that I am concerned about. And so with that, I will give the floor to another council member.
Thank you, Council Member Taylor. Vice Mayor Nash.
Thank you. I agree with everything that has been said, both by the, well, almost everything by all the community members, as far as the priorities, other council members and staff. And I look forward to actually being able to get into the items and prioritize and look at these. I guess what I'm continually stumbling over and is just what is our goal here? What is the difference between a priority, a work plan, just everyday operations within the city? And this has been touched on by several other council members, but it's a discussion I've had for over a year with City Manager Jerome Robinson, where we've been trying to sort of just how do we, I would love to get some consensus on council, how we see that. To me, there's items that are very important to the city, but they are not actually priorities for the council. And one of those would be the IT master plan, which has been repeatedly on our council priority list. But to me, that's not actually, that's something that is very important to the city, as is making sure payroll is met. But it's not something that actually should be what I consider a council priority. So I'd love to have a little bit more discussion, some discussion around that and what it means. I do understand in the staff report, it explained how something that is a priority is has essentially first priority with staffing and resources, and that if it's on the work plan, it's it's important, but anything that's on the work plan can lose resources to something that's a priority. So I guess I'd love to have more of a discussion around this, because to me, priorities, the things that come up to me for priorities are climate action, land use, the Menlo Park Community Center, making sure that's getting constructed. There's others which we've all been discussing, such as, I think there's perhaps some transportation opportunities that we need to make a deliberate decision. Do we want to be following this or not? But essentially, we need to, I think, as we discussed the list, which staff has made of all these discussion points, we need to have a separation, to me, of what is actually a council priority versus what is a work plan. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Vice Mayor Nash, and yeah, and I know that that's that has been an ongoing debate, and like that nomenclature, and I think it's important, right? Because that we separate out and understand and have some very specific framing for what we consider priorities, and what are important things or goals or work plans, but are separate from that, and that we can, we do have the ability to change from how that has been viewed in the past on City Council, and so yeah, I appreciate everyone's comment. I'll just, in ideas, I'll sort of throw in a very quick synopsis of my framing, and then go into, like, what are some specific projects that are important to me, whether they're priorities or whether they're work plans. They're things I like to see sort of movement on. So for me, I think the framing is what are the things that, the two sort of tent poles for me are what are the things that are being responsive to residents, and what are the things that we can move the needle on, right? And so in that sense, again, there are lots of things that are great long-term projects, of which, it's important for Menlo Park to be a leader. Climate action, I think, is one, and we've been bold in that area. But in all honesty, that's not stuff, we're not going to move that global needle, right? We have the ability to be examples, but we won't move the needle. The things that we can move the needle on are things that directly respond to what residents are saying would improve their quality of lives. And so in instance, again, if we're, and not to, and let's certainly have a discussion about this, but like, for instance, a quiet zone, right? That is something that the Menlo Park City Council has the exclusive ability to move the needle on and bring action on, right? And so those are the types of projects I'm interested in, or the types of priorities I'm interested in. We had a situation in the Willows where, for San Francisco Creek, there was a mattress that had been dumped in the creek and had been sitting there for months, and a resident had not gotten any success in getting any sort of government entity for months, over the course of months, to remove the mattress, even though the government does have that responsibility. And so in a situation where we have a local government saying, hey, we're doing all these great things in the form of climate action, which is like really important, or racial justice, again, which is very important. But if I'm a resident and I have to sit and look at this wet, dirty, soggy mattress right across the street from my house every day, and no one responds to it, then I'm going to think that government really isn't doing much, or the local government, right, isn't doing much. And so my thing is that those are the things that I want to sort of be responsive to. And so in that sense, like for me, again, I like, a priority is like, especially as we look to getting out of the pandemic, and these are not things that are completely novel or new, and there are some efforts being made, but it is sort of looking at Willow Oaks Park, right? I've been very public that I think that there has been not adequate investment in that park for a number of years. Again, I'll keep saying it. Over the past 20 years, the city has invested $40 million in Measure T, our redevelopment agency funding into parks, of which less than $400,000 has gone to Willow Oaks Park, less than 1%. So for me, being able to renovate a park is something that the city has exclusive control over, and the impact is real and not a part of a larger picture. The issue which was brought up during public comment is really important to me is Willow Road. Now, I know we have a project to repave Willow Road this summer, which possibly might be pushed back. But I remember when I first ran for council in 2014 at a debate, residents then said, hey, and at that point the issue was traffic, and then when it wasn't traffic, it was speeding. Residents have said that this has been an issue. And I remember one of the things in that election, I was running against all incumbents. And I remember doing one of those debates. It's like, well, we should do all of these things. And my response to them was like, wait, but you're the incumbent. You've been on city council. Why are you now in this debate saying what could or should have been done? You should have done it, and you didn't do it. And so we still have residents, and of course those, I'll be frank, those incumbents were reelected, and even still we have residents on Willow Park coming and saying, on Willow Road, saying that this is an issue because it wasn't a priority for them, and after getting reelected. And so I'm going to say it's a priority for me, right? Because it literally has been our priority for those residents for literally almost a decade. And I think what can happen there, again, whether it's speed feedback signs or whether it's crosswalks, is relatively minimal as far as like the time and investment. And I know, again, I know that there are staff bandwidth constraints, and staff is doing a lot. But for me, those are the things that I am most interested in, things that the city has exclusive control over and an ability to actually impact the quality of life. And I'm less interested because, again, the whole sort of famous quote, which I'm butchering, is like, right, politics is all about what you do with a limited amount of resources, right? Resources are limited. And so for me, the priority is those things that council has exclusive control over and can move the needle, the quality of life needle for residents. And the things that are less a priority for me are things that are more feel good, that are benchmark setting. And not that they're not important, and not that the city doesn't have a role in them, but they are less a priority for me. And so that's how I'm seeing going into the larger council discussion on the other side of lunch. So with that said, we're at 12:01, and I think that means it's a good time to break, and we'll see everyone on the other side of lunch. Did the city manager really quickly want to add anything before we go into the lunch break?
No, we're going to put together a list for the council members of all the items we thought have been brought up, send those to the council, and we just ask that you identify for yourselves the top 10 and then share from there. Send that back to us, and then we'll present a summary when we come back.
All right, everyone.
Have a good lunch.
Can you clarify, you're going to be emailing us, or Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
And just, can I check just one more time with our city clerk? I know that there was the one speaker that
Mhm.
weren't able to reach. Any luck with that, Judy?
If you'd like, I can try to open up the microphone now. So again, this is for Ezio Alviti. I'm going to virtually ask you to unmute. And I do see that.
Hello, hello.
Oh,
can you-
perfect. We are able to hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. I've been trying so hard. I'm blind, and navigating these screens is not so easy. Um, I live on Glenwood Avenue at 416, and so I'm therefore very close to the train track here. And I've lived in Menlo Park since 1976, and, and, s- and so a long time. The trains have definitely increased over the years. I would like to note that the freight trains are far louder than the passenger trains, and they are required to sound the horn a quarter mile prior to a railroad crossing. So if we are so fortunate as to have the four quadrant gates at both Glenwood Avenue and Encinal Avenue, a southbound train would still have to sound the horn because Glenwood Avenue is less than a quarter mile north of Oak Grove Avenue. And so I wonder if we could put four quadrant gates at Oak Grove Avenue as well. Otherwise, we'll still be hearing the horns, at least the ones that are southbound over here. And even the northbound trains, the freight train horns are so very loud. When they're required to sound them at Ravenswood or Oak Grove, they are going to be heard over here. I am not aware whether they're required to sound a horn when they're traversing a station, even with quiet zone. I hope someone can look into that to see if that's a requirement so that people stand back from the platform and not too close. So those are my comments. I thank you for finally succeeding in connecting with me. It's been a struggle, but I'm happy to have my voice heard.
Yep. Mr. Alviti, thank you for staying persistent, and we were glad to hear your voice.
So with that, through Mayor, we can take the scheduled lunch break, return at approximately 12:34. Again, we will be still in a live meeting, so engaging webcams only until we reconvene before engaging microphones. Thank you. Welcome back, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the City Council. At this time, I am going to be asking that our staff engage their webcams at this time.
Well, welcome back from lunch, everyone. So I'm sort of open as to how like it's best to structure it going forward. I just got the list sent to me, so I didn't do any voting. But so there are obviously clumps of items here. There are the staff recommendations, right? There are things that have come up in public comment, and of course there are things that have been suggested by members of council. I don't know if at this point it may make the most sense to walk through the staff recommendations and to see if there are any sort of questions about them, or if there's any specific things staff wants to highlight about any of those items, and then we sort of make our way from there. Does that work? Vice Mayor Nash.
So at the end of the day, what is the purpose of, what are we trying to come up with? Is there some number, or is there some number that we need to winnow it down to? Or obviously looking at this, some are very big, some are very small. Any suggestions on how to approach this?
I mean, I'll chime in and then certainly let staff or the city manager provide her thoughts on it. I think for me, part of the exercise is not specific numbers, or there is a number. The key number is 3, right? Are there, what items here has support from 3 members of the city council, and what items do not? Right. And so if any sense, I think that doesn't mean that obviously everything of which there is at least a majority support for then becomes a priority, because obviously that there's still like sort of like a narrowing that probably has to go from there. But for things of which there isn't, a majority council support for, those are easy to at least be able to say for the moment, these are not things that staff will be devoting any substantive amount of time to in 2021. But if the city manager has additional thoughts, she should definitely chime in.
I think that summarizes it very well. I think, and of course, today's not the last opportunity to weigh in. The idea is to get a consensus overview from the council with particular projects or work products that you're looking for. And then we will bring that back in a staff report on February 9th. And the idea is to give you and us some time to process. And then I think it also will, what's also important about the projects and goals is how those will be implemented. And again, I think Council Vice Mayor Nash, as you pointed out, some are very broad and large, and some are more focused. And so the tactical way for implementing those is going to be different, if that makes sense.
So if you don't mind, just when I'm looking, just doing a really fast view of it, there's 2 things immediately that jump out: the 2022 housing element and the Menlo Park Community Campus, both of which are either mandated or we've strongly committed to. So it seems that that's 2 of the 3. And then again, looking at it, climate action plan implementation, again, we've done a tremendous amount of work, and I think we've strongly committed to that. So right there's 3. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how to sort of put the rest of it in context. Obviously, we have to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I guess I'm actually even wondering if there's things which we should just pull out first that are sort of essential to proceeding, and then there's more which have a little bit more flexibility. But I'm willing to do anything. It's just a proposal.
Thanks for those comments, Vice Mayor Nash. Councilmember Willison, and then Councilmember Mueller.
Thank you, Mayor Combs. So I was reflecting on the helpful perspective, Mayor Combs, that you were making prior to lunch about the ability to kind of do things that are within the city's discretion. And I'm interested in finding like win-wins for the council, which I'm sure we all are. But I'm trying to balance kind of 2 different kind of philosophical areas. One being, our need to show as elected leaders kind of long-term leadership of developing our city, of addressing, looming threats, be they climate, be they COVID, and addressing historic inequities. Those are kind of like big things. And how do we balance that with, addressing our current residents' kind of quality of life issues? And are there ways where we can kind of, and I know we have staff capacity constraints, kind of like a little bit chew bubble gum and walk at the same time, and maybe address in kind of concrete bite-size amounts and steps benefits that can accrue incrementally over time for residents. So if I take, for example, the quiet zone or the gas leaf blower ban, my guess, and obviously we've heard a lot about the desire for those from residents, and I don't think, I don't want to speak for council, but I don't think any of us enjoy long blasts of the train horn or the gas leaf blower in our face, or hearing it all day long while we're working. Those are obviously quality of life issues that we completely understand. We also have massive other issues that we need to deal with in our city. So, but are there incremental steps where we can be showing forward movement on these issues, so that over time, so whether it's piloting, purchasing some electric blowers for municipal operations, or piloting some kind of program, leveraging some things we're seeing in other communities, something like this year, or coming up with like a plan over a multi-year process, or for the quiet zone, digging into, doing a study session potentially. Just what would it even look like? How much does it cost to put down quad gates? Like, what did Atherton learn? So we can show movement, not to show movement, but actually have movement on some of these quality of life issues, and then leverage where is there overlap. So in terms of these like meta things, like creating safe and healthy communities, like having streets that are walkable and bikeable, and this like visionary thing with, tangible projects like a Willow Oaks bike connector project where you have a pathway, or making a Willow Road safer to cross now. So what are things we can do to put radar feedback signs, crosswalks on Willows now? And again, looking at how do these incremental quality of life things, can they build to kind of larger, longer term things, so we can all feel really good about where we're going. So that's just an initial thought based on the comments you made, Mayor Combs.
Thank you for those comments. Councilmember Mueller.
Thank you. So building on the questions that Councilmember Nash raised. So the way I'm thinking about this now is just foundationally, what's important is that the 85% that's not within the goals and priorities is as strong and stable as possible, right? So foundationally, the city has services it's trying to deliver in a pandemic. And so having those be as strong and stable as possible, that's not a goal, that's not like a prior council priority operationally for this setting, but that is something I keep in the back of my mind, because the ability to deliver these council priorities, let's face it, is going to be based on the strength of the foundation of the city. And as we do that, the two items that I just immediately, like when you look at the list, for me, just automatically are very the same, are somewhat similar to Councilmember Nash. One, COVID-19 response recovery. I don't want to just be the city to just be dealing with that. I want the city to be leaning in on that. And that's why I think of that as a priority. On all those things that I touched on, talked about before, about how do we lean in on supporting vaccinations in our underserved populations and at-risk populations? How do we lean in on the testing? How do we lean into what's happening at the county and the state level with respect to small business recovery and coordinating supportive services, childcare, and just communicating? There's so much information that has to get out to the public. And really at the local level, we are the best position to do that with our stakeholders. So that for me is number one. Like that is, we have to figure, we are in the middle of something that has altered everybody's life, and delivering on that right now, I think, is of critical importance. Number two, just automatically the housing element in response to the RHNA process is something that just requires ultimate attention, utmost attention. Delivering that to the city, working with all of the different areas of the city, having that conversation, figuring out how we deliver those housing numbers in a way that augments the quality of life of residents in our city, getting their feedback, and then working through all with the special districts, with our school stakeholders, getting all of their input and creating a quality product that delivers housing across all levels is going to be a robust community process that we need to lean into. Those two things alone, when I think about the 8 years I've been on council, those two things alone are such an incredible amount of work for our city and our city staff. So the other things, and doing all of that with a racial equity lens is, I don't want to not say that's something that we absolutely have to be focused on. So all of those other things that come after that on the list are things that certainly require our attention, and they're all well deserving. But those first two, we just cannot shortchange staff's operational capacity on. We just can't. And so obviously you guys know how I feel about the CAP. I want to move the CAP forward. The SAFER project is a project that falls under the CAP, I believe, affecting sea level rise. It's funny. Everyone says, well, council, there was some concern that our staff wasn't, professional staff wasn't prioritizing CAP, but that SAFER project is a big CAP project. Responding to sea level rise is a big CAP project. And then there's other CAP projects that the city is moving forward as well, that won't be coming to fruition until, just because of the time within the program, until 2022. And certainly, I think what's also important to know for folks is that if it's not identified as a council top 6 priority, it doesn't mean professional staff isn't working on it and things aren't moving forward in the city. And one of those I wanted to talk with you guys about was obviously the racial equity baseline project with Dr. Terry Givens that staff is still putting together, that will be coming toward us. There is still capacity to try to figure out those other things, But today we're talking about operationally, what are those things that require the most attention that we need to lean into that just have to be delivered? And so for me, just immediately, again, COVID-19 response, recovery, and then the housing element, for utmost importance.
And just so we're clear, and this the question are directed towards the city manager, the COVID response isn't currently listed as a staff recommended priority, correct?
I think it is as under the recruitment and retention of the new staff members and rebuilding library and community services capacity.
Okay. So Councilmember Mueller.
Yeah, for me, it goes beyond that though. City Manager Robinson, it really is leaning into those other areas that are happening at the county level and making sure that we have capacity to say, okay, you know, how do we go ahead and augment vaccination process at the city, what that's happening? How do we augment the testing that's taking place? How do we augment the communication that's coming out to the county? To me, I actually want, and I know that we're trying to figure out how we deliver our services during COVID-19, but really having a staff member dedicated to the incapacity dedicated to say, all of these other issues that are taking response, how do we augment them and get to our residents with this information? So, and that's the difference. It's not just how do we deliver these services, but how do we actually go further than that and make an impact in all of those other programs that are taking place. And the one thing, and I should have mentioned it, I obviously, MPCC is something that's incredibly important. It's obviously something that has to get done this year. I actually think of it as like, for some reason, I don't even think I have to say that's a priority because it has to get done this year, right? It just has to get done this year. So I'm like, of course, that's something that I don't have to advocate for. We just have to make sure we do it. But the other two, I think how we approach that and the intensity with which we say to staff, really go after these things, that's the difference. MPCC, I know we have to get done. It's going to get done and we have to give that the attention. But there's a question with which the other two items, how do we say, do we just want to deliver services? Or do we say, no, we want to go further than just delivering services in COVID-19, in the COVID-19 response. We want to make sure that we are, at the highest level making an impact here. And then the same thing is with the housing element. I've been a part of a couple housing elements. The level of intensity in which there was engagement with the public was different in two of them. And candidly, this one, with the numbers that we're looking at, it has to be at its highest level. We have to really work hard because to get across the finish line in a way that's going to matter most to the city and have buy-in from our residents and to make the most of that opportunity, it's going to be a lift that we have to put those resources into. And it can be, and the more that we put into that, I think the better outcome we're going to have for our residents.
So if I can just make one comment here, I hear your thoughts about testing and vaccinations, and I think the most effective and immediate way to work on that will be to work with the county as a partner and the fire district. But and just we do have testing occurring now in the Belhaven neighborhood on Sundays, I believe. So we are making some progress there.
Thank you for that additional information, City Manager Jerome Robinson. And so my question then to council is that on the staff recommended priorities, right? I mean, all of these are things that sort of will happen, or a lots have already happened with regards to them. Is there some item or two items on there that you think, though, we should not describe as priorities? And again, that's separate from a statement of like the work that is involved in bringing them to fruition, but just that at the moment you think that they are things that shouldn't be described as priorities. Vice Mayor Nash.
Thank you. Two thoughts. One is, I'm not sure, is the public able to see what we're discussing, or how does the public engage with this? And then the second question is, can you state which of the numbers are the staff, or can someone state which are the ones that are staff priorities, so that I'm trying to, right, I know, I'm wondering how that relates to that. I'm assuming that it's the first,
Well, I have what's in the staff report, and in the sense that is my sense of the public's access to the staff recommendations. But I think you're right. I don't think we've, or at least in the meeting, actually, listed those out. And so what I have in the staff report as the staff recommended priorities for 2021, the top is the 2022 housing element zoning code update and related work, Menlo Park Community Campus, rebuilding library and community services, information technology master plan implementation, the Menlo Park Safer Bay project, and then recruitment and retention of qualified staff. The city has 4 leadership positions vacant: city attorney, police chief, community development director, and assistant public works director for transportation. And so that's what I have as the staff recommended priorities for the city. And so my question is again separate from a discussion about the work or work not happening with regards to these projects. Is there anything there that a member of council thinks we shouldn't sort of give the branding or label of being a council priority? Vice Mayor Nash.
Thank you. So I personally think that information technology master plan implementation is something that's very important for the city to do. It's something that we've been doing over many, several years, and it is not actually a council priority. And I would say the same about recruitment and retention of qualified staff. Again, it's something that we need to be doing. It's very important, but it's not something that council actually it has much input into, or as far as that's the job of the city manager to be hiring everyone except for to be hiring the police, the community development, and public works. It is the responsibility of council for the city attorney. But just generally, I would not consider that a city council priority in the same way that, and then I guess 2 other comments. I would look at rebuilding library and community services, as has been stated in several public comments, as a more across the entire city, city staff, not just specifically for library and community services, although I realize that that is a large portion of it. And actually, I will stop there. I'll stop there.
And I'm going to go to Councilmember Taylor in a second, but just so then I can understand, like, if I'm like walking to your suggestions or getting to them sort of backwards, is that you do see the council priorities as the housing element, the Menlo Park Community Campus, and then the Menlo Park Safer Bay project of what has been recommended by staff.
Yes, with the same, as Councilmember Mueller said, very much falling under the climate action plan.
Okay, totally fair. All right. Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Combs. I have a question just about the Safer Bay. On here, it says that in the meantime, staff is working with the project partners to develop a draft memorandum of understanding to formalize the role. Is this something that is going to happen in 2 hours, or going to take the time between now and the time that the grant is possibly approved, or hopefully approved?
Thank you, Councilmember Taylor. I can try to answer this question. So Nikki Nagaya, Public Works Director, and for that particular scope of work, that we expect the negotiations will take actually several months, and we are starting just this week in order to work with the funding partners and the San Francisco Creek JPA representatives to start down the path of a term sheet that would then be followed by a formal agreement. And so we want to bring that to the council for approval prior to potentially receiving any FEMA grant funds, so that we're sure that we have the funding in place from our partners before we accept the FEMA grant and commit ourselves to providing a local match towards the program. So that would need to happen before the summer, but it's all dependent on the success of the grant application and being awarded from FEMA.
Thank you, Mr. Gaia. I have more of a comment about one of the priorities, and that's the Menlo Park Community Campus. I just want to stress that the importance of including the community. And that's something that isn't specifically on here, but I would like to call it out. This project is a partnership with the city, the community, and Facebook. But I just want to make sure that there is recognition of the community and inclusion of the community. And that isn't visible on that statement, but it should be a part of our priority. And I think those are my only comments on the staff's priorities.
Thank you, Councilmember Taylor. So sort of going back to one of the statements I said before lunch about like sort of, sort of this prior, focusing on those things of which we have sort of ultimate control over. Obviously, when it comes to Safer Bay, which is a huge project, this sort of skews in the way opposite direction, right? We have no control over whether FEMA gives us money or not, other than to ask. And so my question then is, with regards to that, is where are we without? I mean, Ms. Rudicchio brought up the issue of like, we didn't get the grant with regards to the interchange landscaping, right? And so I have some sense of what sort of state that puts us in with regards to those efforts. With regards to this, like, where are we at if the FEMA grant doesn't come through? Is it just that like sort of we've kind of gotten this band together and you're going to go out and just continue looking for money, or is there some other plan?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Combs. So I think generally for the FEMA grant, we've applied for a significant sum of money in order to advance a very large portion of the protection of the shoreline in Menlo Park. And so we've had some early discussions with Cal OES about other potential funding sources that might come through the pipeline in the future if we're unsuccessful on this round of the grant program through FEMA is called BRIC, or Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. It's the first time FEMA has offered this program. And we just heard in the last week or two that the new federal administration is interested in putting more money towards it. So that's a good sign, but we're competing nationally. So we're recognizing that the funding is uncertain. So there are some other FEMA programs where we've been successful in securing funds in the past. The Local Hazard Mitigation Program is one that's offered through FEMA. We currently have a grant for the Chrysler Pump Station replacement as part of that program. So that's another one that we're looking at. And then we're also looking for other kind of more planning level grant funds that we could continue to work with the partners that we've established through the FEMA partnership so far, and also looking to bring in other partners with the Flood and Sea Level Rise Agency, Caltrans. There are many other stakeholders that will need to be engaged in the longer term. And so we're currently looking for some opportunities to advance longer term planning on that front as well.
Thanks for that information. And so back to council, my question is that if there are things that we don't think are priorities, council priorities, but then there are things that certainly will be worked on, do we want to call them something else, or do we just, or do we want to, they just sort of float back into the work that that staff does, or do we want to specifically sort of have something, some other way of identifying this group of projects? Councilmember Willison.
I have a question for staff. What is the implication or the consequence of us removing some of these staff-generated priorities? So my hunch is if we remove the IT master plan, but it stays on a work plan, does it actually kind of change the way staff operates? I know there's a sense of pride that staff has in having their work be a council priority, and we certainly want them to feel important and valued. I think it's just a kind of a contract between the community, the staff, and the council, and we want to make sure that the language is reflecting all those expectations. So, I'm inclined, I think I echo a lot of what my colleagues have been saying, the housing element, because to me that's tied, again, if I kind of take it up a level, to our need for housing, our building of our community, our inequities, and then COVID, to Councilmember Mueller's point, being a really important thing, and kind of to dovetail on Vice Mayor Nash on modifying, rebuilding library community services, and into like a greater COVID recovery, being more proactive about how and if the city can be involved in vaccinations and communication. That's kind of another higher level, creating our safe community. And then the Safer Bay as being part of climate action, but also in that climate action, I want to make sure building electrification stays top of mind, and that VMT, reducing transportation plans and shovel-ready infrastructure, is up there. So if we kind of repackage and take off IT master plan and kind of reshuffle this, how is that reflected in staff's to-do list and in how you do your work?
I was just going to ask Nick to answer this question.
Manager, the request several years ago that the council identify priorities was in an effort to give staff very clear direction that if you have to choose between which project to work on, the first projects we're going to work on are council priorities. The effect that removing the IT master plan or rebuilding library and community services, to the extent that there are other top priority, or there are other priorities that the council adds to the list, it just means that it's more likely that work will not get done on those on the items that are removed. What we've attempted to do is provide a recommendation that staff believes is definitely a stretch. Everything on the list is a stretch and a challenge. However, it's our assessment that these projects are important. They need to have very clear delineation that if you're working on nothing else, or if you only have an hour to work, on a project, you're going to work on the top priorities. So the consequence is that interdepartmental projects, again, like the IT master plan, which have a heavy impact on every single department with the implementation of new systems, training, customer service, et cetera. And I'm sure that the council has heard concerns from residents about opportunities for improvement in a variety of functions. We just will not have we will not have that clarity that that is a high priority and that we need to focus on that.
Vice Mayor Nash.
So I guess one is I was suggesting that the rebuilding library and community services, not that it comes off a broader description, and that it includes all of the city services rather than just library and community services. What I was suggesting is that the recruitment and retention of qualified staff, as well as the information technology master plan, are not, they are very important to the city and all, but they are not, I do not consider them council priorities. And I guess to that, with that idea in mind that I guess I believe that city management could in fact prioritize them to staff without having them be council priorities.
Yeah, I think I'll just sort of chime in. It's sort of interesting as I look through all of the staff recommended council priorities. None of them seem to be actually the idea of council, right? And so, right, I mean, the housing element is a state requirement, and MCC comes as a result of a donation from Facebook. Rebuilding Library and Community Services was a staff-generated idea. Obviously, the Information Technology Master Plan predates me, and so I can't tell. I don't know exactly its origin story. Maybe there is some prior council member whose Safer Bay was PG&E approached the city, and then again the recruitment again is a staff generated idea, and so I do think that can lead to a disconnect. Again, not that staff council priorities are things that just have to originate or ideate within council, but I do think that in looking at again these things, it does become striking that even the things of which there is some flexibility, again, like I say, it's not, I'm not seeing things that like were dais generated ideas. And so for me, again, like I would just say that it provides to some degree a little bit of a disconnect. But so I think like to really sort of kind of move us forward. I mean, one of the things that we can do is just, when it comes to these council, excuse me, these staff suggestions, that we really just sort of go through and see where, because we've sort of talked around them, but see where there is still, I mean, obviously there definitely the housing element seems as though there is support from the council that stays on there. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry, Councilmember Willison.
Absolutely the housing element, but I do want to add and reflect on some of the comments from Menlo together about the framing of the housing element, and that we might want to not just be a state mandate, but as more framed as an opportunity to address our historical inequities.
Yeah,
that might be like a little add. So I might actually be like adding a little scope to that.
And again, we're not sort of voting on these in their final state at this moment, and so there is, again, will remain lots of room and ability to make tweaks. But so and again, it seems as though the Menlo Park Community Campus, there's obviously we've already committed millions of dollars to it, and tons. So but that remains a council priority. So then the Rebuilding Library and Community Services, what I've heard about that is this idea that like that this isn't a council priority, and the extent to which it is in some ways sort of packaged as part of a COVID response. Although again, I mean, in all fairness to what's being presented here, it's a reorg of one element of the city, and so it's not just a COVID response. And so if we are sort of saying that this fits into some COVID thing, I want to be transparent that we're sort of we're limiting in some ways the sort of the impact it at least as we're seeing it on sort of library and community services, because I see it again like as a comprehensive like overhaul of how we sort of deliver and look at the delivery of those services, and so again, so totally open to feedback that like this is something that should be more generally like the city's sort of engagement response to COVID. City Manager Robinson.
So I understand the council's comments and I appreciate them. I guess I just want to make the point that from the staff's perspective, we're talking about resources. So we've identified resource-rich priorities, if you will, that need time and attention. And so, it's ultimately the council's decision, period. But to not have sufficient resources, if there are new and different priorities from the council, that dilutes the priorities that can be committed to the ones that we've proposed. But again, completely at the council's discretion.
Vice Mayor Nash.
Two comments. One is regarding the library and community services. It seems that was all due to, those changes were due to COVID. And so bringing it back is also due to COVID. And so I guess that's how I'm assuming that it really is more COVID related as opposed to something that would be happening anyway without COVID. And then I'm sorry, I've lost my second thought. I will jump back in. Thank you.
So if I may, I think it is COVID related. So there's sort of two different buckets, if you will. One is looking forward. So when can gymnastics come back? When can in-person classes come back? And how will we plan for that? Do we want to, just as an example for gymnastics, do we want to contract that service out? Or do we want to bring back employees or hire new employees to provide those services? That takes a certain, that's not a rubber stamp initiative. That takes a certain amount of time and effort to put in place. So that's one bucket. Just gymnastics is an example. It's not the sole case. The other bucket is future services, both for the MPCC and for the Burgess campus. What does our future look like? And as Councilmember Taylor brought up earlier, we need community engagement on those issues. And again, that takes a fair amount of time and enterprise. So, I think, and we want to be in a position where we're planning for that we're not caught off guard. 6 months from now, everybody's got a vaccine and everybody can be in-person classes, and we're still wondering what direction we're going to take. So that's really what that's about.
But then sort of City Manager Jerome Robinson, so if the idea is that, like, does that have to be, do we have to describe that as a council priority, right? And so, like, if let's say we go through this exercise of removing some items from this list, but then we don't necessarily add things that sort of then call on the resources that were specifically going to be used with regards to that priority that we removed, it doesn't seem as though we've just decided that, like, this isn't something that we want to project to the community as something that's a priority, but that we're not actually saying, I think to Councilmember Willison's earlier line of question, like that the staff should, we're not saying again in any of this that the staff should necessarily stop doing something, and maybe that will come. I don't know. I haven't heard it specifically, but that, like, but then there could be a point at which if we then sort of remove something and say that, like, we don't want to describe this as a priority, but then we do add a priority that utilizes the same resources, then yeah, we very much have made a decision that, like, not only is that thing not a priority, but it's something that shouldn't be worked on because those resources we think should be better utilized someplace else.
Completely understood. And I think that's why this has to be an iterative process. Like, the council tells us what they think the priorities are, and then we'll come back at the February 9th meeting. And as we've experienced before, maybe the February 9th meeting it's not a one-stop decision. Like, we need to go back and forth because it really, as you point out, it really does depend on what the priorities are and what the fallout from that, is that the right term? Fallout from that is, and what resources will be impacted. And so
Councilmember Willison.
Couple of things. One, I think we have like just a branding issue here to some extent. And I could see us taking the 6 items that the staff put on the list and just putting them in 2 different categories of branding. Potentially one being, whatever we want to talk about it, like strategic priorities, and one being operational priorities or something. And then that might satisfy some of this conversation we're having. Another challenge that I'm having, and I'm guessing the public might be having and staff might be waiting to talk to us about, is the resource constraints. And I'm curious whether, obviously, I keep going back to the quiet zone and the leaf blowers. There's a lot of things that a lot of people want to see police reform in our town. And are we supposed to, in this conversation, factor in the fact that all the resources potentially may already be spoken for in the 6 things that staff is proposing? Or are we supposed to let you know kind of what we've heard, what we'd like you to check out, what could be moved on those, and then at February 9th or whatever, you come back and say, okay, for a leaf blower this year, given what the other things you guys said, we can move, this much on it, but that's the only thing you can do, or we can move this much on it, or we could take off this and then we can move this and this. Like, what kind of what level of feedback are you going to want from us at this stage?
I think it's most efficient if we have sort of high level feedback and then we'll come back to you. I agree that in some cases we can add resources and make further progress on a number of strategic or operational priorities. And thank you for pointing out that it's probably more of a branding issue than anything else. And so it goes back and forth, but these are the council's decisions. And so, it's not one and done. I'm sure that there will be consideration throughout the year of what the priorities are as we report back to you. Because if we have learned anything in the last 11 months, can you believe it, that nothing stays the same?
I'm just sort of staying on that, like what would be a strategic, just so we're all on the same line, on the same page, what would be a strategic priority versus what would be an operational priority? As we look through like staff recommendations, I'm assuming things like the recruitment is operational, IT master plan is operational, but is rebuilding library and community service, is that operational or is that strategic? And in the housing element, is that operational or strategic? I don't know if I like this direction. I'm just, but just wanted to Councilmember Willison.
Yeah, and I'm making this up as I'm going along, so bear with me here, and I'm totally open to hearing what everybody else has to think. But again, if we, I like your IT master plan and staffing being, operational. Right now, the way it's written, the library and community services to me seems a bit operational. If we were to expand the scope of that priority and talk about COVID recovery, that to me would be more strategic. For the housing element, to me, if we kind of roll that up about housing and inequities, that would be more strategic. If we just want to address the regulatory compliance issue of the housing element, that could potentially be operational. So I don't know if they cleanly fit one way or the other. I think it's about how high we want to take it or how specific we want it to be that differentiates which bucket it might go in.
Yeah, I would say let's default to what is the best case scenario, right? Or what would be our highest sort of goal. And so like if we see the housing element as with all of the different, and I know there's not necessarily council consensus, but with all of these additional sort of bells and whistles as being strategic, then I say that like our idea is that it is strategic. And so, but just so I'm understanding, so housing element, strategic, community campus, is that strategic or operational? So let's go strategic. All right, I'll make them here. Rebuilding library community services as it is currently is operational. Information technology master plan operational. Safer Bay. So is that if we sort of well, I assume that just has to be sort of strategic, and because again, it's a part of CAP, which is strategic, and then recruitment and retention of qualified staff is operational. Okay, so we've not eliminated anything from the list. We've just separated it. That was great work for an hour. But and I'm about to go to Councilmember Taylor. And but now then I want to, what else? Because so that's we've taken staff's recommendations and we've divvied it up into two different lists, and so I think then the question is, what would we want to add to either list, and how does that look? Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Combs. And I like the direction strategic versus operational. What I would like to add, and this is to the housing element, and that is the history of land use in the city of Menlo Park, to make sure that that is a part of the discussion, and whether we use existing information, the color of law. There's enough information out there now, enough documentation about what has happened, but I just want to make sure that the history of land use is included. I am extremely concerned about what happens in the interim. And I have no idea what that looks like. Is it increasing the number of BMRs in Menlo Park from 15 to 30%? I don't know, but I have a huge concern about the population that falls through the gaps, through the cracks, that falls through between now and the time that true access and inclusion when it comes to land use policy in Menlo Park happens. What do we do in the interim? What about folks that are impacted? That's a huge concern of mine. And then I have a few comments which I can take offline because it'll take a little bit of time regarding the strategic plan for rebuilding the LCS service adaptations. I just have some comments, but I'd rather take those offline if everybody's in agreement. And this is just more around, I don't believe the lens of equity is actually there, even though we're using it. And so I have some concerns around that, but I can get more specific in a conversation with the city manager and with our library director, if the council agrees.
Yeah, I'm totally support. And just I think because it's come up a couple of times with regards to the housing element, I'm totally in support of it. We taking this state required exercise and taking advantage of it to really sort of explore all the ways in which historically and going forward we can sort of make housing options equitable. I see the city attorney would like to speak, so I'll call on her.
Thank you. One thing I did want to just frame for the council is that this cycle, the housing element, is going to look very different than past cycles. In addition to the fact that we have a very large RHNA number to accommodate, that in itself is going to cause the housing element process to look different. But also this year, there is a requirement for a discussion of affirmatively furthering fair housing. And so some of the history of land use issues, et cetera, will necessarily get incorporated into the housing element discussion. Also, environmental justice element will be required this cycle, and that will also bring in some of the climate issues and CAP issues, perhaps, that the council has been talking about. And then finally, the safety element also needs to be updated in connection with the housing element. And this year there will be some additional focus on issues like sea level rise and resiliency and flooding. So it's really going to be a very comprehensive housing element cycle. And I do encourage the council to start the process earlier and give it the appropriate amount of resources, because it's, as all of you have said, it's going to look very different this cycle.
Thank you for those comments. And so again, I want to sort of then sort of transition into like what of our thoughts or where there is support for what has been suggested by council. So Council Member Mueller initially brought up this idea of sort of like, sort of writ large, the city's engagement in response to COVID-19, right? And so, and looking at it more broadly than it is now, and that being a priority. Where do we stand with regard? And I know some other council members sort of, added to that. Where do we stand in? Where do we stand with regards to that? Is this something that should be as sort of scoped out by Councilmember Mueller? And I think the city manager added some things about like in relation to sort of engagement with the county. Is this something that there is support for exploration of it being a priority, right? And so again, it's not like it becomes a priority, but just like are there, based on what was shared by Councilmember Mueller and what the city manager is there 3 votes for like, yeah, this is something that we need to explore, that it's its own sort of bullet, it's its own line item. Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Combs. And I really appreciate Councilmember Mueller bringing this up. I have huge concerns just all around. Whenever it comes to the health and wellness of any resident in Menlo Park, I believe that the city should be a part of the conversation because this is where we live. And I don't know what year that Menlo Park, I guess, has an agreement with the county that the county is the lead when it comes to anything related to health in the city of Menlo Park. When it comes to COVID, I have huge concerns because I advocated for testing for the community. It came 8 months later. And so now all of a sudden we're the priority when it comes to vaccination, but yet we have not provided enough testing. And then also, we haven't provided enough education and outreach about testing and the vaccine. And so I just think that there's a whole lot of layers there, and I'm not sure how the city can unpack that. I'm just not sure. I'm supportive of it because it's necessary. I think some of it has come a little too late. And so building trust is going to be extremely difficult. And so for the city to be the lead there, I'm just not sure. I'm not sure, but it is definitely worth, I believe, discussing further. I mean, it's about the health and safety of our residents, and our numbers are going up. And we don't know if it's specific to one area or if it's, evenly across the city. We just don't know.
Thank you for those comments, and I know that's been an issue up and down the states where cities, obviously smaller cities, even large cities, have co-opted or sort of outsourced health-related issues to the county governments because they then have the resources for health departments, and although in this sense I don't necessarily see us sort of tackling that strategically as much as sort of like at this moment, like, the city like looking to establish its own health department, as much as sort of ways in which we can though team with the county to have a very sort of bespoke Menlo Park, engagement or process with regards to this. Councilmember Willison.
Yeah, I really appreciated Councilmember Mueller elevating this issue. I mean, it's like the elephant in the room. We're online because of the pandemic. So, and the other important thing for us to remember is that, we have people in our, I think as Councilmember Mueller pointed out, people are really suffering right now. They can't eat, they're fearing evictions, they are living in overcrowded conditions. 50%, when people might not realize, is about 50% of Menlo Park are renters. And I'm not saying that renters are all vulnerable, but our community is extremely diverse, and we have a wide range of people facing different needs. So I totally hear Councilmember Taylor's concerns about Menlo Park taking the lead on health issues, or a lot of these issues. But as I understood Councilmember Mueller's point, it's even beyond just the health. It's about looking at supporting programs and services related to, social services, helping people get food, understand what their options are in terms of rental assistance or what have you. So I really see this as like it's still a crisis, and this is whatever we can do. So I'm not sure what the answer is for Menlo Park's role in this, but I would be interested in directing staff to see what the options are for Menlo Park in terms of dedicating staff resources to this, what the impact would be, and where we could be most useful, non-duplicative, and make the biggest impact for our most vulnerable residents as well.
Yeah, thanks for those comments, Councilmember Willison. I do think though it's sort of worth pointing out here, like, right, that we've sort of given staff sort of general direction, and not like not very specific, do A, B, and C in an area in which it's not clear that like there is expertise to deliver. And so, but I do think it's worth sort of, again, it is the elephant in the room, or on the VC, right? Like, it is worth saying that, like, let's explore like how a very sort of specific, like a priority, a COVID response priority looks like for the city. But I will just sort of say and be public that my expectations for staff are not high, not because I don't think of them highly, because I think of them all very highly, but because we aren't giving you lots of direction, and this isn't necessarily like an area of which there is lots of sort of city level expertise, and so that's how I see it. But there definitely seems to be support for at least exploration of a COVID-19 response priority. Councilmember Mueller, and then Councilmember Taylor.
I would just point out, even at the county level, there wasn't a lot of operational expertise how to deal with the pandemic prior to the pandemic hitting. We have there are multiple assistant county managers who have learned how to run testing programs and picked up expertise during this process. What I think would be, and I think Mayor Combs, you hit the nail on the head. I think what happens today is we say, okay, we want this. We know we want this to be a priority. We know we want to amplify our efforts here beyond just how do we maintain city services in this, to how do we make an impact with our partners, our agency, our multi-agency stakeholders, and scope that out. Go to and basically it could, one idea would just be empower the city manager to create a task force internally that would look at communications around these issues, look at testing, look at tracing, talk to all of our stakeholders and say, okay, we have built some capacity operationally within our city to go ahead and start partnering in these areas where we've carved this out. And then look and see what is it that we can achieve internally in the city. And actually, do we need to actually look at finding external partners to help deliver these services? But at the end of the day, what we do know, and candidly, and Chief, I'm going to acknowledge that you chatted to us. We can't chat back to you. I discovered during it, you can't see it, but you pointed out that right about now, the majority of our first response personnel are at the Menlo Fire District now are vaccinated. Well, is there the opportunity for the city to partner with them and help organize max vaccinations taking place within the city? And if we have put aside the operational capacity to do that, and we're going to the county and saying, we want to do that, can we move the ball faster and get that accomplished, especially as more vaccinations, potential vaccinations come? So I know that these are things that are going to come, especially throughout the year. And for us to prioritize that now, scope out what that looks like in creating that operational capacity for staff, and then assigning someone internally in the city and saying, you own this. How you deliver on this is something that's a priority to council with metrics, and then follow that throughout the year to see what progress we're making. I think that's the benefit of the residents. So, but I think we scope that. I think I'd be happy to sit down. I'm not sure it serves our city manager to have me in that process of sitting down, but if it so pleases her, I'd be happy to sit down with our professional staff and talk about how we scope that out and carve that out. but I don't need to be. And I'm not necessarily saying council needs to be, but I think that we've reached that point in the pandemic where it's, as Council Member Taylor indicated, look, it's a big lift to ask a county agency and state agency to get to that hyper local level and make an impact. And there's a lot of places where, although there's been mountains moved, that it's still fallen short. And for the city to step into that divide and say, we want to make sure we get all the way there, I think is appropriate at this juncture.
Thank you for those comments, Councilmember Mueller. Vice Mayor Nash, did you have something to say?
Yes, thank you. It's making a little bit more sense to me when Councilmember Mueller says getting to the hyper local level, but I may be a lone voice here. I don't see this with everything else on the city's plate as being a responsibility of the city, or actually maybe not responsibility. I wonder if this is the best use of our resources. To the best of my knowledge, we have no one with a background in this, although to some extent it's probably project management, which I imagine numerous employees are probably, numerous of our staff are probably very talented at. But I just, with all the other pieces on our plate, I wonder if this is the best use of resources, or if we're not better having someone having better communication perhaps with the county, and also better communication back to our residents, but actually to step into the place of actually being more in the, of coordinating delivery of health services, and possibly even beyond that, just does not seem like something that is the right thing to do at this point, unless if it can greatly benefit our residents, yes. I just don't think that that's our, where we have strength at this point, and we've got plenty of other things on our list, So I guess in scoping this, I would say, please, I do not want the expectation to be that we will do it, just that to look at, is there a way that we can effectively do it given our current resources and staff, not only staff capacity, but staff expertise.
Yeah, Vice Mayor Nash, I'll actually add to that and say I share your concern and caution, and what I would want, in this exploration phase, and I'm not again trying to give city staff more work, but just to sort of do some kind of analysis or quick survey about, like, are there other cities like kind of our size, comparable size, doing something like this? Because I think it is a lot to ask to invent the wheel in this situation. But if you can find that there is some city doing this sort of outreach engagement, or sort of being a facilitator, a project manager with regards to sort of vaccination efforts and other things, then in sort of more robust communication, although I want to, hats off to the staff. I think we've done a great job when it comes to communication regarding COVID-19 but yeah, I would want to sort of, instead of sort of like, again, having the staff, try to create something that we don't know exists, just to see if it exists, or if it's like, yeah, no one else is doing this. And so it's going to be a lot for us to try to do it. Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Combs, and I really appreciate the honesty, Vice Mayor Nash and Mayor Combs. I have the same concerns. My concerns run a little deeper, and this will go back to something that I said earlier, just about someone else already predetermining your value, and then they determine the options. Getting a vaccine, any type of vaccine, is voluntary. It's not mandatory. So I would appreciate, if we're looking at scoping this, that a conversation with the fire chief. He has been a part of the conversations with the county about testing and about vaccine from the beginning. I have reached out to him on multiple occasions because I was hoping to do a partnership to do testing. That didn't happen at a county level, unfortunately. But moving forward, is anybody on staff participating in the equity vaccine distribution working group? It's every Thursday. is anybody with the city a part of the conversations at the county to talk about the vaccine distribution? And if the answer is no, I know that there are people in the city of Menlo Park that are volunteering their time to participate. But for me, it's about health education here. If we're not educated, how are we going to offer something? And then the vaccines can only be distributed by somebody who is a licensed medical professional anyways, which that the fire department covers. But again, I am looking at how can we have access and inclusion, not making something appear to be mandatory. And so if the city doesn't have that lens, then we need to look to who does, so that we can at least be aware of what options are available to our residents, as opposed to being the lead. And so I know the county is working on this. And so I would just say, look to what the county's doing. If you think that they're failing residents in Menlo Park, let's take action. But if they are on the good path, then, let's help them. I believe in helping them, and I don't know what that help looks like. Does it mean that we contribute financially, that we organize our volunteers, that MPC Ready has been ready to do something? I don't know what that looks like, but I know that there's opportunity. Because I would like to see even anybody who has COVID in the city of Menlo Park anywhere, I would like to see them recover. But if they don't have the tools that they need to do that, vaccine wouldn't even matter to them. So I just want to make sure that we're using a lens that is needed in this moment in the pandemic.
Thank you for those comments, Councilman Figueroa. So I think we've given the staff a lot in this area, and so go forth and do good. No, and so I get it seems as though there are possibly some mottos with regards to with cities teaming with the county. So and so yeah. So are there any? I did want to transition. To some of the things that came up during public comment. But before I did, City Manager Jerome Robinson, are there any questions that you have?
Well, I think the council will have questions when we come back to you with our summary, but I think you've been very helpful, and we'll put it together for the February 9th meeting, and then of course then it's up for grabs again. You can reevaluate.
Yeah. Okay. So totally. Yeah. I don't think we could ask for more. And so again, I did want to transition. There were two things that came up again and again during public comment, and so I did want to, in an effort that we are being responsive, I want to address them. My kid is very loud. Sorry. The one was gas leak floors, and the other was quiet zones. Yeah, this is definitely not a quiet zone. If staff could just chime in with a couple of minutes on, because I know that there has been some back and forth between residents and staff on quiet zones. What's their sense of what would be a next step for Menlo Park if that was identified as some sort of put in some sort of work plan, and how much sort of initial sort of work that would entail.
So I'm not the best person to answer that. I think if Nikki Nagaya feels comfortable sort of addressing it. Nikki, can you do that?
Sure. So quiet zones definitely have a long history. Just even within the 7 years that I've been with the city, they've come up a couple of times. And so what I can share is some information that we gathered in the last round of this exploration, kind of in the 2014, 2015 time period, and then kind of supplemented by Councilmember DeGalia's comments earlier and information that we've received from the town of Atherton through Ms. Abramowitz, who also spoke earlier. So generally, the Federal Railroad Administration has the process defined for the local agencies, as Councilmember DeGalia said, to create a quiet zone. So that process, from my understanding, is fairly straightforward. However, the difficulty for us is that we don't have the equipment currently at our grade crossings in order to enable us to just declare a quiet zone today. And so essentially what we would be looking at is retrofitting the existing grade crossings with quad gates, so railroad gates covering, you know, all 4 directions of travel at each crossing. We have 4 crossings on the Caltrain line, and then 3 along the Dumbarton corridor, so 7 total in the city. But understood the comments today were focused on Encinal and as well as Glenwood and kind of spanning down as far as Oak Grove. So generally those gate installations, the estimates we've gotten from Caltrain in the past, it's roughly $1 million per crossing or $250,000 per gate, for which you need 4 per crossing. So there's a question on whether the existing gates would be sufficient and we'd only need to add 2. So the bargain price of $500,000 per crossing versus a full $1 million. So that's something that we don't know yet today, but we would need to work with Caltrain to construct and permit those additional safety improvements, the gates at the crossings, before we could move forward with declaring a quiet zone. So the last thing I will mention is just our current thinking has been that through the high-speed rail authorities work to bring high-speed service to the peninsula, and the blended system proposal that they proposed for the Caltrain corridor, they have offered to install quad gates at all of the at-grade crossings up and down the peninsula. So we had been tracking them coming in to retrofit the crossings would be a way to enable quiet zones in the future, but that's not a short-term investment. It will be many more years before high-speed rail is doing that installation work.
Vice Mayor Nash.
For the February 9th, could you please come back with whether or not we need 2 gates or 4 gates per crossing? Is that a fairly easy assessment?
Well, it's a Caltrain assessment. So we can inquire with Caltrain, but I can't commit their staff today to getting us that information by the time we'd need to publish the report on February 9th.
It would be great if you could ask that question and see if we could get the information, or perhaps Atherton has a similar experience.
Well, I think it's dependent on the age and the state of the equipment at each location, not just the presence of the equipment.
Got it. Perhaps Councilmember Willison wants to speak, because I believe this is, well, I know that's in her district, but what I've heard from a resident is that they were, apparently Atherton was doing it for $500,000 per crossing, which to me is much more feasible compared to $1 million per crossing.
Councilmember Willison.
It sounds like a party at your house, Mayor Combs. Yes, I have been in touch with residents, and I know this is a big quality of life issue in District 3 and for anyone that lives in proximity to the train. And while I think it's great that if high-speed rail ever happens, that they would fund this, I think that we can all agree that a generation of residents will probably be raised until before that ever happens. So I think it's something that we should at least look into sooner than later. And so this is kind of where my earlier comment in reference to Mayor Combs and kind of serving residents' needs, are there incremental bite-sized efforts we can take to move it forward? So per Vice Mayor Nash, looking into exactly how much this would cost, what would the time frame look like? What would Caltrain need? In earlier conversations that I had with Ms. Nagaya, we were talking about the idea of implementing this versus just inquiring about what it would take to implement this. So while I don't know if the implementation of this and like the $1 million or whatever the price tag is and the staff time to actually construct this is within the scope of what we're able to do during a COVID recovery and what we have going on. But I can't see why asking some of these questions and understanding more about this couldn't be addressed. I believe it could take maybe up to 1 day of staff time to do. So that's something that I'm very interested in learning more about on behalf of the constituents.
Okay, so does that work for staff, or I'm sorry, Councilmember Mueller?
Yeah, I support moving forward with the quiet zones. I don't know if it can be something that's accomplished in 1 year, similar to what my colleague said. So I think what's important for it is to come back with the feasibility timeline. So and then we can figure out on what timeline to put it as a city goal. So it sounds like a study session topic with direction based with the timeline to me.
So if you will, I think what we could do is, subject to your feedback, not create it as a priority, but as a task, if you will, that we will create a study session, time available, but we know that we hear that it's important to the residents and to the council. So if that's sufficient, we'll take direction today on that.
Councilmember Willison and then Vice Mayor Nash.
Yeah, it looks like we're also getting some feedback from the fire chief, Chief Schapel-Human, about engaging with the fire district and our neighboring agencies. So I believe we have an upcoming fire district joint meeting. So I would suggest this is something that we add to the agenda and continue to speak to Atherton about their experiences with this as well. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Nash.
Thank you. Just to repeat that if it's a 2-gate versus a 4-gate per crossing endeavor, that to me would be different. It would mean that I would want it on a much faster track. So perhaps if we get that information before the study session or whenever it's available, just that one piece of information to me is very critical. Thank you.
And I think it's important to add that there was some additional complexity because, again, there was across the public comments, the desire for quiet zone was brought up in relation to Oak Grove, Glenwood, and Encino. Right. And so, are we just talking about Encino? Are we talking about Encino and Glenwood? Or I think Oak Grove is possibly not possible. But I just want to, because obviously, if we're just talking about Encino, then that's one thing. But obviously, the more crossings you add, the more complex it gets. So what do you want staff to focus on? Or do you, Councilmember Willison?
Yeah, I mean, I would, if there's going to be a focus, to focus on Encino. But I think while the questions are being asked, if you're on the phone with Caltrain, it certainly seems not that much more effort to at least inquire about the other crossings. I do want to say that I am very much aware of the grade separation options, and that the preferred alternative right now, option C, only Encino remains untouched. So that one seems like kind of like a no-brainer, whereas the other ones would have to be integrated into larger conversations about grade crossings. So I would focus on Encino, but if the amount of effort to at least investigate a little bit on the other ones, then please do that. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Okay, so then the other item that was very popular during public comment was gas leak blowers. And so I won't go to staff for any statements on this. I'll go directly to council. I think a lot of us know some of, if not all of, the history, and so where are you at? I think it is an important and appropriate forum to respond to residents on this. It has come up obviously for several months now, obviously, and again, it's a recurring issue. Vice Mayor Nash.
Thank you. I'm wondering if the city has changed out any of our gas leaf blowers to electric and what the experience is there, if that can give us any sort of first look at it.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about some work that our maintenance crews have done. So through last fall, when we had 30 plus days in a row of spare the air days, our crews were unable to use gas-powered leaf blowers. So we have an existing ban on spare the air days that you can't use the equipment. So in order to keep our crews functioning, we purchased 3 to 5 electric leaf blowers, and we've been using those. The experience is generally good. The technology is improving, although it's not necessarily as competitive as what you'd get with a gas or a diesel powered system. But the main constraint is that the batteries do not last an entire day, according to like their work schedules. And so they generally use those for as long as the batteries last, and then we switch out the equipment when they run out of juice. So in order to implement, just electric leaf blowers, we would need to make a larger investment in the equipment and battery charging infrastructure. And right now, the batteries are charged at the corporation yard. So it reduces efficiency if the guys are running back and forth to pick up new batteries over the course of the day. So we just would need to work through kind of those operational issues in order to deploy it further. But so far they've been good in order to reduce the emissions and during those kind of challenging times with the air quality issues in the fall.
Vice Mayor Nash.
Thank you. Is it possible to get multiple batteries? What I'm trying to think of is when we talk about the commercial gardeners, it seems just how much of a burden is this if they can, if it's possible to have several batteries charged and you just charge them overnight and then bring them with you in the truck, or is it not that simple?
Ms. McGuire, please.
So I think if you're thinking about a larger ban outside of municipal operations, I think it's definitely possible to purchase multiple batteries. I don't know to what extent or to what how many, for example, somebody would need over the course of the day. I just know what our experience has been just based on kind of the basic investment that we did to keep the crews functioning over the last couple of months. But one thing I will mention in terms of larger city service impacts, if you're contemplating a larger ban, is that the contracts we have with our landscape maintenance crews, we have 3 different contractors that do work for the city, and their current agreements do not contemplate a ban on gas leaf blowers. And so we'd likely be negotiating some sort of change to their contracts before they expire if we want to put something in place before the expiration of those contracts. So there will likely be an increased cost to the city through that as well.
So I'll go to Councilmember Mueller. I do want to have some sense of what direction we're giving staff regarding a citywide ban of gas leaf blowers. Obviously, if we ban them citywide, then ultimately we have to abide by that ban as a user. But I do think that we need to sort of be responsive on that, which the residents who support it have been very clear about what they want. Councilmember Mueller.
So in 2019, when I was serving as mayor, I asked the Environmental Quality Commission about this question because I was interested in having them look at it then. And the feedback that came back from the Environmental Quality Commission was that they had looked at it at some point in the years before that request and actually studied it and had reached the determination at that time they were not recommending that the council move forward on that, or that they were going to even move forward on that, because they believed that the battery charging at that time was such that it was insufficient and would actually lead to people, gardeners, commercial gardeners, turning on their cars and running their cars so that they could charge the batteries and thus actually emitting more CO2 than would be necessary if they were just operating the handheld. Since that time, there has been advancements in this area, I am told, and I am completely supportive in sending this back to the Environmental Quality Commission to make an assessment of whether they want to recommend to council at this time moving forward with it, and even directing that be done this year within their work plan with staff support. But I completely appreciate the public input we've gotten on this issue. But my only hesitation in immediately saying, "Oh, this is something I want," is that I immediately want to move forward through. Is that I do remember that this was something that was studied by the EQC in years past, and we have a very forward, progressive looking EQC, and they actually at that time said it's not ready yet. When it's ready, I want to act on it, and I think there's plenty of people telling us now it's ready. So I want to put it into the process that we have in the city in order to look at that and come back to us with a recommendation.
Thank you for those comments, Councilmember Mueller. I'll just sort of quickly add my own thinking here. Again, back to how I said I look at things like the things of which the city has complete control over, and those of which this is something obviously the city has complete control over. We can ban leaf blowers, gas-powered leaf blowers. But then there is that additional element of enforcement, right? And so that's to me where I have like concerns about the effective or about the value of going through what will be a very divisive process and exercise, because it has been in other communities and it has been in the past in this community. Whether at the end of the day that like, if then we do have that ban, then there is the issue of enforcement, right? And then are we going to then commit the resources necessary to enforce, in the sense of that, like if I call because my neighbor's yard is or my neighbor's using a gas-powered leaf blower, or his or her gardener is using a gas-powered leaf blower, am I going to get a voicemail, or am I going to get someone who's going to say like, yeah, I'll come out there now and look at it? And I don't think we're in a position where we're going to then provide that ability to like actually have that enforcement. Now, I'm not saying that like just the pass of the ban won't have any value, and it certainly will. But I think the extent is that it will create, I think, what is a very frustrating experience for a lot of people, because I don't know that we're willing to commit the resources to really like have it have the impact that is needed, and then provide the relief that residents are really looking for, right? And so they're not necessarily just looking for a ban. They're looking for the actual absence of gas-powered leaf blowers, and a ban doesn't do that. I wish it worked that way in life, but it doesn't. And Councilmember Willison, and then Vice Mayor Nash.
I really appreciate your comments, Mayor Combs. This is an issue that I've been talking to residents about for years now. Some advocates met with me and they were like, how do you get things done in the city? So I really applaud them for their persistence on this issue, because I think showing up about an issue you're passionate about is key to getting anything done. And I do agree with Councilmember Mueller that the time has kind of moved with this topic to, I think, there being much more community support globally and interest in this. I think people being home and hearing it all day long and taking walks and walking through the particles has been huge. I also think that the framing of this from being kind of a CAP climate action project to more of a quality of life, kind of air quality, particulate matter issue has been kind of a way to look at it. So and in terms of enforcement, I kind of think of it as with like the speed limit conversation about putting up speed signs to kind of tell the community. We might not be able to have officers out there giving tickets all the time or being able to enforce the lower speed limits, but putting our values forward and being able to apply a culture in our community that sets a tone. I think there's value in that. And so I'm very much in favor of looking into this. I'd be interested in if a commission wants to work on this. I see this as kind of outside of the cap. I'd be interested again in incremental steps. So I would be in favor of renegotiating contracts with our landscaping companies to get rid of their gas leaf blowers and looking at additional batteries for our municipal fleet of blowers. I also would want to be pursuing kind of rebates or what other communities are doing in terms of equity for gardeners, and making sure if we do have enforcement fees or fines, if we can not target kind of lower income gardeners. But I also just want to say to residents who are looking for action now that, you know, we as a city can do what we can, and I'm interested in looking at this citywide, but to kind of look within yourself as well. And I know that this is an issue that has bothered me for years, and it took me a while to actually go out and talk to my gardener about switching our own gardener's gas leaf blower to an electric blower. And, you know, we ended up paying more, and sometimes that relationship can be, you know, awkward. So I would first everyone ask themselves, you know, what can you do in your own home and in your own neighborhood to make that change? And then in terms of regulation, we can do what we can, but sometimes these are like personal choices that individual residents can look into making on their own as well. So I would be interested in just seeing what can be done on this.
Thank you for those comments. Vice Mayor Nash, are you going to?
Thank you. Yes. So one issue is the particulate matter issue is actually just as well. It doesn't have the gasoline exhaust fumes, but it is still all the blowing of everything, even with the electric blowers. So rakes are great, although it doesn't look as nice. But I was wondering if City Attorney Silver could comment about your experience with Portola Valley, if to the extent whatever you think might be beneficial to this discussion.
Sure, thank you. Portola Valley recently enacted a gas powered leaf blower ban. It had a very long implementation period. And so it was about a year, and it actually has not technically gone into effect yet. It's going to go into effect very soon. The town has also concurrently enrolled or started a electric power subsidy for people to turn in their gas blowers in exchange for, I think it's $120 towards an electric blower. And then the issue I think that the town has struggled with and is continuing to struggle with is the type of enforcement that's needed is, you know, do you cite the individual gardeners or do you cite the individual homeowners? And, you know, how do you ramp up those penalties? And obviously during COVID, it's a very daunting task overall. But it's not an easy issue to number one, roll out, and number two, the enforcement issues are pretty significant. And then finally, I think the issue that town of Portola Valley has also had is that lots of people, when they hear leaf blower issues, they think about the noise. So for instance, in Palo Alto, there's another variant of the ordinance, which is a ban on the noise decibel levels, even of electric. So that layers another complexity to the situation, and just banning simple gas leaf blowers, especially to address the noise issues when everyone is at home, is not always going to root out the entire problem. So it is a fairly complex issue.
Thank you for those comments. So I think Councilmember Mueller had suggested that you know, staff sort of connect with the EQC and to see the extent to which there is some change in their willingness or sense of the importance of this issue, and that being a next step. Is there a general, and I know obviously the most recent addition to the EQC is someone who's very passionate about this issue. So I have no doubt that if there is interest among the majority of that commission, then there's certainly probably someone willing to do lots of the legwork. Is there a general consensus to that approach regarding that issue? Okay, totally fair. The next thing that came up in a number of the comments, and I apologize, and please at some point here, staff definitely sort of remind me of some things that I may have not, that I may have missed. But I will say that, like, with regards to the disaster preparedness issues, we are going to have, and it hasn't been scheduled yet, but there's going to be an upcoming joint session with us and the Fire District Board. And so I think that those, that will be the most appropriate forum to address some of those issues. And so I won't go to those issues. One issue that came up in a few of the comments was essentially some variation of police reform. And so I do think it's important to sort of get a sort of check-in. I think one of the issues for us that distinguishes us from some other communities is that, of course, we've been in the process of looking for a police chief. And so that certainly has hampered a full-scale sort of review of like how we might want to look at how we approach policing services. Again, we have been able to develop ourselves with the services of Chief Spiller, which have been great. But I don't know if the chief wanted to chime in on this, or the city manager, just to give some sense, and then we can go and see if on council there's any additional, or actually let's start with council, right? Is there anyone on council that specifically wants to sort of add additional comments or contacts, and then we'll go to the city manager and Chief Spiller. Vice Mayor Nash.
So I am interested in looking at this, but I believe that it's City Manager Jerome Robinson has stated that it will be part of when we get a new police chief in, which I think makes sense. And so I sort of see that as anyway, I guess I'd love to hear how the recruiting is going and other comments about that. But I think certainly there's interest in doing it.
Mayor Combs, should I just do a quick report on recruitment? So,
and then you next, Councilmember Taylor.
Or if Councilmember Taylor, if you want to go first.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up with Vice Mayor Nash's comment just around waiting until we have our new police chief. With that timeline, what happens in the interim? The challenges that are still happening, what do we do with that? So that's where my concerns are.
I mean, Councilmember Wolfson, or I don't know.
Well, I'll just make a comment before City Manager Jerome Robinson. Thank you. Is that this is a very important topic for me too. It kind of rises to that strategic priority, and I hear Councilmember Taylor's concern about waiting. I think we need to balance the immediate needs and making sure our house is in order. But I just wanted to assure the public that I think the whole council, the Black Lives Matter kind of protests that happened last summer, that wasn't just a moment in time, I think for all of us. And this is something that we've been wanting to address and look into. And so I do appreciate the sustained interest and advocacy on this topic. And let you all know that this is something that I think is top of mind for at least me, I think the council, and that I see it needing to figure out the sequencing with the police chief as well. But the issues with the Facebook funding and just the issue in general, it's not something that is not being considered, and it's on our minds. Thank you.
City Manager.
Thank you. So just with respect to the recruitment, the application period closed on the 20th, so about a week and a half ago. I'm reviewing the applications next week. I'm happy to report that I think, just based on high level statistics that I've seen, that we have a number of highly qualified people. We just, who's the best choice for Menlo Park is still at bay. The interviews will be held on February 11th. I'll interview the top candidates on February 12th. And then I think we'll have some additional council weigh in at that point. But precedent to that, the Chief Spiller, Interim Chief Spiller, held community conversations in each of the 5 districts on 5 individual days. They were open to anyone, but we thought it would be wise to make them district specific. We had the recruiter attend each of those meetings to hear from our community about what they're looking for, both in terms of policing, but also in terms of an ideal candidate for chief. So I think that was helpful. It gave us a chance to listen. I wasn't able to participate in all 5, but I did participate in 3 of them. And I think it was meaningful for me to hear what the community had to say. So I'm hopeful that the new police chief will be able to join us, hopefully sometime in March. There's a background requirement that will sometimes create delays, but I'm still hopeful that it'll be sometime in March. And I can't think of a better way to get to know the community than to start a community conversation about policing and what's important to our community.
Did anyone else want to add anything additional to this item? Okay, so just sort of going through some of the other things that at least came up as far as one thing that did come up was a concern about and then the public comment, the Willow interchange. I think as we stated earlier, the city was waiting on a grant. That grant has not come through, but there is funds to do something there, and I think it is a priority. And I mean, if not like a priority here, it is a priority, and is something we'll be proceeding on. I don't know if Ms. Nagaya, you want to provide additional information on that topic.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Combs. So yes, you're correct. The unfortunate news in the last 2 weeks or so that we did not receive the urban greening grant that we had applied for enhanced landscaping. But there is funding available as part of the project budget that was allocated by the San Mateo County Transportation Authority for a basic landscaping design that kind of meets all the Caltrans requirements. So what we were hoping to do with the enhanced plan was to be able to bring forward an option with significantly more trees in order to respond to the feedback that we heard through the community meetings and the EQC's review of the project plans over the last few years, but that grant opportunity did not, as we said, was not successful. So I think our next steps are to meet with the 101 Willow subcommittee of Mayor Combs and Councilmember Taylor and get your recommendations on next steps to advance forward. And then we plan to come back to the council later this spring for a decision on next steps.
Cool. Thanks for that update. I'll go to Councilmember Mueller and then next Councilmember Wilson.
Public comment. We heard from Mr. Edmonds, who's always such a fine advocate for trees in the community. And he gave an update and an assessment of how many trees are left of the 76. And it sounds like there's quite a few that are left. Is it possible that, I mean, and I'm not sure exactly the difference in the cost of the type of tree, but regardless, funding set aside there, can that funding be used to add a number of trees that we were seeking through that grant. And why was that grant so much money? Why does it cost $5 million? It just seems like, wow. Like that also just kind of jumped out at me. So.
Yeah, those are great questions and suggestions. We can definitely look at using some of the canopy funds for additional tree planting at the interchange. But the scope of the enhanced landscape plan included several hundred trees over the interchange, as well as development of a city-owned parcel on the Willow Road kind of alley frontage into a mini park. And so it was more than just landscaping the interchange itself, but looking to kind of activate that space. It's the area that was used for the staging of the construction trailers during the Willow 101 construction. And so we were looking to also do some improvements to that land as well.
I support using, and I leave it to our subcommittee on their recommendation what's best, but I certainly support using those canopy tree, that canopy tree stock to make an impact there, because it is such an important gateway to the city, and I do miss the way it used to look. So.
Thank you for those comments, Councilmember Mueller. Councilmember Willison.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask the same question about Mr. Edmonds' tree comment, but I also wanted to make sure I don't remember, and Councilmember Mueller will definitely remember better than I do about the kind of the gifting of those trees. And I seem to remember something about them being planted in Belhaven, but maybe that was just my memory, but I just want to make sure we don't rob Peter to pay Paul, or that if there was an intended use for them, that we don't lose that.
Yeah. Were you going to say something, Councilmember Mueller?
Well, my memory, and I could be wrong, is that there has been a number of trees that have been used in Belhaven, and it was identified as a priority location for use of those trees. But there is stock there that can be used for multiple locations in the city. I think there have been some already used in Belhaven from that stock, but so I appreciate you raising the point.
Yes, and that's correct. There have been a number of the trees planted as part of the Pierce Road sidewalk construction. We've planted about 15 trees along that corridor. And also call attention to the fact that through a partnership with Stanford University, if you watched any of their football games this fall, you may have seen that they had trees in the stands, and they also donated about 40 trees to the city that we've been looking to find homes for. So we're doing everything we can to get trees planted. It's now planting season, so we're ramping up our planting efforts in the winter. So we'll try to get all of the rest planted as soon as we can.
Thanks for that comment. One of the other public comments that came up was in relation to a sort of, parking structure, housing, and downtown specifically, I think on some of the city-owned lots. I know the parking structure was a suspended priority. I guess my only question is like, with regards to the housing element, is there some sense whether the parking lots downtown will be included as sites? And I know we're a long ways off, but is that not sort of, in your sense, how we're going to be looking to sort of meet some of those numbers as far as earmarking land for development? I'll let Vice Mayor Nash before anyone in staff responds. Maybe she'll have a more cogent question.
Well, I was just going to say there have been discussions about using parking lots for housing, and whether or not it becomes part of the housing, the plan, I think is, we will see. But there certainly have been discussions, but not to the extent that was described in the by the public comment, with having several levels of underground parking and then a lot of above ground housing. It was not in that context.
And of course, not to obviously bury the lead. That is very expensive. It is very expensive to go underground. Okay, so did anyone else want to add on that? I did again want to make sure is being responsive to that. It is obviously a longstanding. It's been a longstanding issue or matter. And okay. There was a comment in connection with sort of, it was a sidewalk comment, but it was also about sort of interjurisdictional sort of engagement and interaction. Specifically, it was about Ringwood and the lack of sidewalks. Of course, if it's the portion I'm thinking of, that's not actually in the city of Menlo Park, and then I think Coleman was also mentioned. Again, I think that stretch is not actually in the city also, and so yeah, so my question to the council would be, what, if anything, would you want to give to staff regarding those those issues that got brought up? Councilmember Willison.
Thanks. Yeah, Ms. Baruzzi brought up kind of like multi-jurisdictional cooperation. I think it's great that we're meeting with the fire district. I would like, us to be as communicative as possible. I don't know if that needs to be like a priority or just kind of how we do business. But I do, because you touched the transportation topic, kind of the two things I have, I know you're kind of going item by item, but the two things I want to make sure we address are redistricting, which maybe you're coming to, but transportation. And when it comes to transportation, there's kind of like meta concepts, and then there's specific project streets. So meta is more looking at the TMP and the climate action plan, and maybe having the Complete Streets Commission task them on their work plan to look through the TMP and give suggestions on projects that contribute to VMT reduction. So that's more like a work plan transportation. Also, having staff consider the new Biden administration and possibilities for shovel-ready projects, specifically related to grade separation or the Dumbarton corridor, kind of higher level transportation things. And then specific transportation projects, Willow Road. I think, again, to Mayor Combs, like what are some kind of low-hanging, big impact, resident requested quality of life safety actions that can be taken on Willow Road between Middlefield and Gilbert, looking at radar feedback signs, which I think we can get. We've had residents volunteer their property to put up a sign to indicate that it's a 25-mile-an-hour strip. And I think the cost of those is, maybe $40,000 and not a huge amount of staff time to do. And then looking at crosswalks, so those residents can borrow some sugar from their neighbors without getting hurt. So asking staff to look at ways to make that street safer. I know we already have Middle Avenue on the list, so I would just ask that Willow be kind of given the same consideration that Middle is given, because I know Willow is a street that has needed attention for a very long time. And then Valparaiso. I think we've all heard from residents about the tragedy that occurred on Valparaiso. And, my goal, and kind of I've dedicated my recent life to trying to prevent tragedy before they happen, and making engineering changes and advocating for them that will make our world safer so that kids can get around and make some, teenage mistakes without fatalities. So if there's anything we can do on Valparaiso, kind of like short term versus and long term, So some of these transportation projects, again, it's what can we do to move the needle incrementally, and also long-term, and how do we make progress over time on some of these projects. So like a radar feedback sign, if it's just sticking it in the ground versus having to look at, a whole corridor and traffic calming and sidewalks and all those things. So I would love to hear from staff about, incremental things we can do on some of these corridors. And then I'll hold my comments about redistricting. But those are my transportation thoughts.
Yeah, totally fair. It's just sort of in the interest of time, and again, want to make clear, like, again, we're not talking about priorities, council priorities here at this moment. We're just talking about things of which we think that staff should give attention to. I'm supportive, obviously, of the Willow Road efforts. I think I don't know if we sort of need to dive into details from staff. I'm supportive, and I'm supportive of Valparaiso. Is there any sort of, do we have a consensus of council that again, these aren't priority things, but like these are things that with regards to the sort of, again, the radar feedback sign on Willow Road and then Valparaiso that we should tell staff to sort of look into. Again, like I said, in the interest of time, I don't want to have a detailed conversation about this, and we will get to the redistricting. Vice Mayor Nash, and then Councilmember Mueller.
Let Councilmember Mueller go first, please.
Under you, Vice Mayor Nash. Thank you. I actually, on Valparaiso, just wanted to go ahead and comment that I would like that looked at, and I think there probably already is. That already has attention given the accident history that's happened over the last few years. I think it requires some immediate attention. I actually would be supportive of making it one way uphill until such time we have reached a determination of what we want to do there. But given that in the last, I think it was 3 years or 4 years, there have been 2 accidents involving youth coming down that hill. And I know from my lived experience, I actually walk by that roadway at the top of the hill every day. During the pandemic, I walked by that route, and every time I walk by the lookout, there are teenagers there hanging out. Every time. That's at the very top of that hill. Teenagers ride their cars too. They sit there, they hang out at the top of that. And so just by pattern and use, if there's an issue with teenagers coming down that hill, there's going to continue to be an issue with teenagers coming down that hill. And so we've seen it happen a couple times now. I'd like to try to take some immediate action and then figure out what we do moving forward. So thank you. And I appreciate it being raised today.
Vice Mayor Nash.
Thank you. I wholeheartely agree with what has been said, and especially with, I would love to hear from staff how we would go about with Councilmember Mueller's suggestion to just at the, for the interim, make it a one-way street going uphill. And is that something, it sounds easy to do. How would we go about doing that? Is that possible? So to follow up on his suggestion for Valpo Hill. And then just generally, I guess I see a need, and not to go into it today, but just to, how do we get priorities on these safer street requests, the traffic calming? Because it really, I've got, in my district, I know of 5 different streets that are interested in traffic calming. City Manager Jerome Robinson and I've spoken about it. And just how do we go about doing it? I think the current NTMP process is incredibly burdensome for staff and neighborhoods. And what we're doing is we're actually making people advocate for having safer streets. And that seems backwards. And so I guess I would possibly suggest putting that back to Complete Streets Commission to have some recommendations there as to how to do it, but I don't want to make that, I just want to put that out there. And also, very honestly, I was surprised to see the Middle Avenue. I'm not against it. I just was surprised to see Middle Avenue immediately jump onto the priority list. And so, sort of, again, how does this happen? How do we prioritize things? I know that we discussed it in the context of citywide speed limits and the 2019 speed study, but to actually then jump onto the priority list was a surprise to me. Not that it was, anyway, so just at some point, it would be good to have a conversation as to how we can prioritize things. Thank you.
Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Combs. I just looking through the staff report, it says to be determined that a report on Vision Zero policy progress. Is that where this would live, Ms. Nagaya, or would this discussion be a part of the Vision Zero progress? Even though it's not scheduled, I'm just thinking about all of the different concerns that have been shared by the council.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Taylor. So I think on the transportation front, we hear the suggestions and the requests that you're making. I will be very honest that that team has negative capacity right now. And so I think, the council received a report on January 12th that reallocated a couple of positions that we're, just starting to recruit for. But we're currently not able to keep up with like the baseline legal requirements that exist in transportation. And so these projects would be kind of above and beyond those requests. And so I think we need to go back and take a really close look at what you've asked for today, and we can put together a proposal on how we can advance, the projects that you're recommending. But in terms of Middle Avenue jumping on the list, I think that was because we heard at the speed survey hearing that you wanted that on the priority list. So if that has changed, I'm happy to reevaluate and reprioritize how we spend that time. But that project has not yet started and was not scheduled to start until we filled the positions that we're currently recruiting for. So I think definitely I'm hearing that you want to reprioritize transportation projects, but that's going to come down to really a very limited amount of capacity on what we have today. So then, I'm sorry, Councilmember Taylor, your specific question about Vision Zero report, I believe that was a request that you made during an earlier council hearing on the Transportation Management Association feasibility study. And so that's a placeholder to be able to come back and share an update on where we are in terms of the policies that were set forward and the general plan circulation element around Vision Zero. But since that request, we had seen several vacancies in the division, and so there was no capacity to bring that forward. That's why it's listed as on hold and not with a date certain right now. But it could be a place where we bring forward an assessment of the numbers of collisions that occur in the city and how we're doing just broadly on the rest of the policies.
Thank you for those comments, Ms. Nagaya. And I totally hear you about bandwidth, and obviously I don't think it is lost on anyone on council. But also there's a process by which you have to sort of verbalize and publicize the community, the concerns that they have or changes that they want. And so this is part of that process. And certainly it could be that that the actual movement to completion is a ways off, but if we don't start with the process of at least sort of like saying that these are the concerns, then then hopefully at that then when you get to that later date of hopefully with additional capacity, then there isn't that sort of direction. So and we're just building up your pipeline. just look at it that way. I wanted to then sort of move from Councilmember Willison.
Oh, I'm still not unmuted. What would be really helpful for me from transportation is to get a sense of the scale of the asks that we have. So if, let's say, there's 10 widgets or whatever value of so the radar feedback sign is a 1 widget ask, but the traffic calming is a 5 widget. So we have some sense of scale, like looking at shovel ready projects is this, but looking at whether we can get quad gates is this. So we have a sense of like how we even measure what we're asking for. And then what's the difference between you working a teeny bit on all of them versus popping ones faster? It's just hard for us to know how to even contextualize what we're asking for without some sense of that information. I don't know if that would be helpful for other council members. And I'm not saying it doesn't have to be a granular level. It could be like a big circle, a little circle, just some idea. So that would help, I think. It would help me to set expectations for residents too about what we're able to do.
All right, I'm going to go to Councilmember Mueller, and then Vice Mayor Nash, and we will discuss redistricting before we break, I promise. Councilmember Mueller.
Mr. Guy, I hate to do this to you, but I guess it wouldn't be goal setting if I didn't do this once. Is there, and City Manager Robinson, is there any way we can get capacity to look at Valpo Hill? Just something that we can do in the interim time period.
I think the most productive thing would be if that's a consensus, and I hear from all of you that you're really interested in it, that we have an opportunity as a staff to talk about what would be required to do that and initial steps. I just hope that we all appreciate that Public Works has had this has been a very difficult period, and they're doing the best they can. And I know that there's so much interest in transportation, but that we don't have a lot of capacity to respond to it. So what I think we can do, first of all, is come back with a list of the asks we've heard today. And so if in looking at that list, it seems like Valpo Hill is a more immediate need than Middle Avenue or whatever switched, that's just an example, then certainly we'd want that feedback. But I think first of all, we need to know what steps collectively, internally, would need to be taken before we can even give you a date on when we can come back.
I would I personally, from a public safety perspective, would like to have that looked at, given the accident history over the last couple of years there, and that I think that there is a specific driving behavior going downhill that I think might be able to be rectified in the interim time period. So, but that's just where I am. And I respect where my colleagues would be on that, but it's definitely something I've heard very strongly from the community, and also based on what just my layman's perspective of what I see there, I think it'd be very, very useful.
Vice Mayor Nash.
Thank you. Two comments. One is just as far as transportation. The other thing that would be really helpful, which I know is also bandwidth resourcing, but that's just what would it take to get more capacity? Like, can we do consultants? So if there's anything that we can do to actually increase capacity, at least short term, to be able to address things, that would also be beneficial. Realizing that also takes resources. And then I just want to put out that I'd love to make sure we get to climate action priority before we finish the meeting.
Okay, totally fair. So let's go to redistricting, and then we can close out with climate action. So Councilmember Willison, did you want to kick that? And I guess
I know staff is planning on needing to do redistricting. We're waiting for census data. I guess kind of what are we planning versus kind of what, again, could be like a best practice? Are we doing everything that we can be doing on redistricting?
I think I'll just chime in and then let staff probably provide a real answer. I don't, the key decision to be made is whether we're going to have an independent like redistricting commission or not, and that decision has not been made. So I think that's a key factor, whether you have one that is separate from city council or one that ultimately reports into city council, and the city council is the final arbiter. So I know that's out there, that remains to be decided, but I'll let the Councilmember Mueller raise his hand, so I'll let him comment, and then I think the city attorney also wants to chime in.
I apologize. I just need to state, and I don't mean to interrupt this discussion, but I just need, before we move on too far, on Valpole Hill, I'm not necessarily advocating what the solution needs to be, whether it needs to be uphill, one way, or any specific. That's one idea I threw out, but just that we look at it for an immediate mitigation in the interim time period. So I'm not trying to be prescriptive. I don't know what the answer is. I threw that out as one suggestion, but I really respect transportation engineering judgment in terms of what needs to be done there. That being said, let's move back to the redistricting discussion.
So I'll just chime in that in terms of what is needed, the issue of the policy issue, as the mayor has pointed out, has already been framed. And I think that just needs to go back to the council for a determination. From an operational standpoint, if I could borrow that term, the issue that needs to be decided is whether to send out an immediate request for proposals for demographers. I think that would be in the city's interest to get out in front of that, as there are going to be lots of cities that are doing redistricting, and there's a very, very limited demographer pool, and they'll all be operating on a very tight time frame. So I think it would be in the city's interest if we do have your input on that to move forward.
Thanks for that information. And then wanted to bring it back to the climate action plan, and Vice Mayor Nash, I'll let you take it from there.
Oh, I was unmuted all the time. So yes, and actually, let me go back. What do we need to do in order to give permission or give consent to go out for the demographer? What is needed there?
So I'll defer to Starla or Nick on that issue.
I think at this moment, if you give us a thumbs up, general direction and goal setting, we can do that. And then, I mean, we will need to come back with the appropriation, but we can, we'll have a better sense of that once we get the proposals.
Okay, yeah, Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you. So how soon would this come back to our agenda, or would that be determined by the staff report that's going to be developed, the comprehensive staff report about the goal setting? So how soon would it be agendized?
I think I saw in one of the CCIN comments that it should be in March or so, and I think that's about the time frame. So March, April would be the time frame we're looking at. But I would like Clay to weigh in on this if he has a comment to make.
Good afternoon. I think that sounds about right.
Thanks for the comment. So, so now climate action, right? Are we okay to transition to that in 3 minutes left?
Did you get the answer that you needed? I think we have consensus on council on the demographer.
Oh, yeah. Do you need anything additional to? Yeah.
Great, thank you. Climate action. I would love to see this as a priority, a council priority. I think we've already done lots of work on it, and there's work proceeding. And I think that minimally, numbers 1, 3, 5, and now 6, given the SAFER, should be prioritized for council. and want to know if that's, what more I need to do. And then also in the staff report on page C146, I would love to meet with staff. Maybe I disagree with where we are on the climate action plan implementation, and that and that no further staff action is being taken on CAP strategy number 3. Well, maybe not disagree, but I'd like to see there should be active pushing forward on CAP strategy number 3. It's just we're refocusing from trying to do policy work to actually trying to help residents both with education and then actually helping with people apply for and implement the state and regional incentives to install the EV chargers at multifamily residents and also other private property that are covered.
So I think the one thing is where, and again, it's not that obviously climate action fell completely off the list, right? It just wasn't in that top grouping. But I do want to see like where, since the vice mayor has thrown that out, where are other members on the council with regards to that? I actually will go first. I'm, as I said earlier, not in favor of prioritizing it because, as I said, I mean there's there's a number of things I've thrown out here during this session as things that I want to be priorities, and I don't, and even then, I think it's probably unrealistic that those are going to get completed on any sort of timeline I have in my mind. But it even seems, I think, sort of more challenging for me than to say that there's nothing that I'm willing to deprioritize. And so that's where I am. But I think I'm going to be the odd man out. So let's go around the horn and see where people are on that issue. Councilmember Willison, and then Councilmember Taylor, and then Councilmember Mueller.
Yeah, I mean, to me, kind of going back to how I started the day of kind of those like values, I see it as more just the different projects falling under climate action. So the housing element to me is actually potentially climate action if we cite housing near jobs and transit and services. Transportation projects that reduce vehicle miles traveled is climate action. I support Vice Mayor Nash's points about electrification and EV charging work. But I think a lot of it is stuff that is already kind of baked in. It's just, again, a branding thing. And if we do move forward with the model of like strategic operational, not married to that, just a suggestion, to me, that seems like a way to communicate to the community that we're keeping an eye on the largest existential threat in our lifetime, even more than COVID, which is climate.
Totally fair. I do just want to sort of push back, and the climate action plan is a standalone. It wasn't sort of like just borrowing from from other projects as in sort of a branding exercise. It did have its own projects and its own sort of specific work plan for very specific staff, right? And so for me, I think the question is should that be prioritized as being one of the top 5 or 6, or should it not? Not like that it should be sort of repurposed to then take advantage of other projects. Where are you at on that? I can come back to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really fair point. And I think that's like, is climate action plan a project or like a value? So to your point of it being a project with specific tasks, I think, it sounds like Councilmember Nash has some questions for staff about the way they've framed it in terms of a work plan item. But assuming those get worked out, I would defer to kind of where Councilmember Nash is thinking on this.
Okay, totally fair. Councilmember Mueller.
My main difficulty with this discussion is I have no idea what the effect is. None. Like as we sit here and we talk about this, I'm thinking, well, Miss Lucky's working on this, and this is in her department. And so if we're not designated as a priority, what's the actual effect of not designating it as a priority? Because I know that there's work going on in those different areas. And so for me, I think the next time this comes to council on, and I don't know the specific date in February it's coming to us, what's going to be really helpful to me to understand is, well, what's the actual impact of whether we call it a priority or not? What's not going to get done that would have gotten done? Because I just, as we talk about it, I don't know the answer to that. Does it mean none of the work's going to get done in the climate action plan? Does it mean this much versus, that much? I respect that we're trying to make this assessment, but I just don't have enough information to make the assessment on what it means, because I know work's going to still be done in the area. So,
fair point, Councilmember Mueller. Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Combs. I share some of the same concerns as Councilmember Mueller. I am supportive of the climate action plan, but it would be helpful just to get, as Councilmember Mueller just stated, I don't want to just repeat it. It would be helpful to get that understanding of if A, then and not B, then what? That would be helpful for me. And because of time, I just wanted to put this out there because we didn't talk about it. I am very supportive of the REAL, the Race, Equity, and Leadership program. Thank you.
Cool, thanks for that. And so, Vice Mayor Nash, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, just I think it is very important for us to prioritize climate action and basically to empower the city's environmental leadership and how we proceed. I sort of see February 9th when we come back as when we will assess all of these priorities against each other and what truly will make it out of the gate. But to me, climate action is very important. We have our most vulnerable residents are the ones who will be most affected by this. And honestly, District 2 is also right in, is in the flood zone. So that we have a large swath of residents who are will be tremendously impacted by this, in addition to what we've seen over the last year, which is the wildfires, the heat waves, the drought, I respect where everyone's coming from. I just would like to, I will continue to push this as a strategic priority.
Councilmember Taylor, you raised your hand?
Yes. So I just wanted to follow up. So in order to move this conversation forward, do we need to have support of at least 3 council members to say, yes, we're in support of keeping the climate action plan on the priority list?
Yeah, and I think that's there.
Okay.
If I'm, but we can definitely go through and make sure. But there seems to be that there's that support. And again, I would say, like, the issue that Councilmember Mueller brought up, I appreciate that there are different streams of resources, right? And whether something is called a priority or not doesn't it may not impact whether that resource is available to work on it. But certainly what you say as a priority as a group is again, at the end of the day, how you're telling people, I want to be judged, right? And it's how you're projecting about what's most important and valuable to your organization. And again, like, to some degree, I have a concern that a lot of those goals are things that aren't like having direct impacts on residents enough, right? That some of the stuff sometimes are a little bit macro level, and that doesn't mean that we don't do them, but it does. I am saying that, like, is it something that I think that residents are going to sort of judge me on and judge the value that they think that the city brings to them, and I don't think that that's going to be a large percentage of that judgment. But again, I could be wrong. This is just, it's just one perspective. Okay, we are gonna, I'm gonna go to Councilmember Willison and ask, if members of the council want to do one final round of saying something, and then we're gonna close out. Councilmember Willison.
Thank you, Mayor Combs, and I always appreciate the perspective you bring on that. I just want to ask staff, and this is to Councilmember Mueller's comment kind of about the cap and some of the comments we've all been making. It's hard to, again, it's like a categorization branding thing, because I think it's amazingly wonderful that you gave us upcoming agenda items. So my question for you is to kind of put yourselves in our shoes and in the community shoes when you're thinking about kind of your February 9th deliverable and how you're going to come back to us. Because from what I can't tell, some of these things look like they're going to be on the agenda, whether they're on like a work plan list or a priority list or not, like Connect Menlo amenities. Like I didn't feel necessarily the need to raise it because I think it's already on the agenda. So, but that's something and then some things like we have to raise for it to get on the agenda. Other things are just showing up on the agenda. Other things are living on work plan lists, and other things are on priority lists. So I think sometimes we just have a hard time knowing like how to insert, like what's necessary to, what discretion is needed from council versus what staff's doing. And so I just think I know you guys have been working. First of all, I just also want to thank you all for your heroic efforts this past year. I'm sure you're all exhausted, and thank you for spending your Saturday with us. I'm saying this particularly to staff, but to everybody. And I know thinking about going into February 9th probably is a bit daunting, but I would just encourage you to take a step back and hear what we're saying about this branding and these different categorizations, so that we're all speaking the same language, so we know when it's necessary for us to raise an issue, or is the issue already there or not. So that's just what I would ask of staff, and I thank you in advance.
Thanks for those comments, Councilmember Willison. Definitely agree with them. I just take the motto of just bringing it up, and let someone else say, oh, or we've already got that. Okay, totally fair. Did anyone on council or on staff want to say any final comments? Councilmember Mueller.
Yeah, I just when we were having the discussion about the COVID-19 response and recovery, it seemed like the end of the discussion really started to focus on whether or not we have the expertise to do, help with testing and vaccination. And I just want to, again, explain that when I'm talking about that, it's not just, bringing resources to help the impact of that, of course, is something I want to look at, but it's not just that. It's also having a staff member dedicated to looking at, downtowns, how we help our downtown and small businesses get the information. Small businesses throughout the city get the information they need for recovery, coordination with supportive services regionally, making sure that we get that information to the public and are making an impact there. Amplifying the efforts to help with support childcare locally, all of those things around communicating all of the information that there is. It's not just one topic area. It's about creating an internal city task force about how we amplify all of those things. And then especially looking at how we do that in the areas of our community that are most vulnerable. And so I didn't want the framing of that to somehow shift to just testing and vaccination, but really about having that operational framework in the city to confront this pandemic at a hyper-local level across all those multiple areas. And I think it really is, whether it's one person in the city who's that, or a task force of people put together to do that, but really sort of taking that instead of it being responsive, just being aggressive and pushing that forward. So I hope that reframing is helpful, but I didn't want that to get lost in the conversation of how that conversation ended. Thank you.
Thank you, Mueller. Okay, Vice Mayor Nash, I am trying to close this out. Please go.
Well, just as far as two other items that I would like to discuss at some point, unless there are. One is, has been touched on, which is how we use commissions and volunteers and just empowering people, especially as Councilmember Mueller is talking about outreach. And in addition to the effort that we do within the city, how can we go further using these, just how to best use commissions and volunteers. And then the other piece is Councilmember Taylor and I are working on the community amenities. We have it coming back up onto the agenda soon. As Councilmember Willison said, I'm looking to City Manager Jerome Robinson if we actually need to prioritize this as we discussed yesterday, in which case, I don't know how to do this given the time constraints.
No, so one thing that I think we do prioritize as a staff is if there's a council sanctioned subcommittee, then that's a flag to me that topic is important to the council as a whole. So you don't need to prioritize it for it to be able to come back to the city council.
Thank you.
Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you again. I wanted to express my deep appreciation to the staff. This is the first time that we've all been on screen together. It's reflective of what our meetings used to look like. I really appreciate that. And to whomever took my special handwriting notes and translated that into typing, I appreciate that as well. Just wanted to say thank you, and thank you, Mayor Combs. I appreciate your leadership in this meeting.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'll just sort of in closing extend my thanks to staff for again spending almost the entirety of Saturday with us to discuss city issues. You know, I was recently going back and forth with a resident who a longtime resident who had questioned the value of this exercise, because she'd been of the impression that you know, it didn't sort of give life to things, these sort of go planning sessions, and it didn't sort of necessarily make things move any faster. And she may be right, but this is like how government works. I mean, partly the reason things take so long is resources, but the resources are reflective of the process that has to be engaged in. And that is that we don't just get to make decisions whether we want to make streets one way or whether we want to put sidewalks some places, or you know, what sort of building codes we're going to require. It has to happen after, in many cases, a long public engagement process where everyone, like was mentioned, like was the case during public comment, gets to sort of say, hey, this is what I think about this issue, or this is what I think is a priority. And so I would say that this that this process, while you know, frustrating for all of us, I think at times, right, in this meeting, is a reflective of you know, how things should happen when everyone is engaged, when everyone gets the voice and gets to say, and where residents have a forum and a venue to raise issues that maybe aren't on the minds of staff or of council, and say, hey, this is something that's in our lived world that we think you can have an important role in improving. And so with that, again, I thank my colleagues and thank the staff for you know, for the time and for the dialogue and discussion today. Did the city manager want to add something?
So just one thing, again, thank you to you, council, for joining today. I think we've identified the February 9th meeting as a potential feedback moment, and I will probably have some kind of report on that meeting, but there's a pretty long list that was developed today, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to pull all of that together by February 9th. So, but we will be working on it, just so everybody has an expectation that we'll certainly have it as a key priority.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. A lot came up in the meeting. Councilmember, Vice Mayor Nash.
Thank you. Just to clarify, so is the idea that you will be doing more analysis and the items that'll come back are the ones that were discussed as opposed to everything on the list, or how did you view that, please?
I think we'll develop what I'll call it the council's list and identify resource trade-offs that might need to be made or resource adds that might need to be made. So that, and to the point that you all have made again and again today, so that you have a deeper insight into the impacts of that decision.
But not on the entire list, which I think is good.
No, not on the entire list. We don't want to put you to sleep. We want you to stay awake to be able to read it.
Well, if that's everything, then have a good rest of your Friday, everyone. Or excuse me, Saturday. A good rest of your Saturday. It's been a long meeting.